Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is our community's house. We are all guests in it here to serve our community. My name is Mike Little. I'm the mayor for the District of North Vancouver, and I want to welcome everybody to our special meeting of council for Monday, November 23rd. Now, the only thing that makes it officially a special meeting of council is that it wasn't originally on our schedule when we set our schedule back in January, so we've added this meeting. But because the special meeting is actually to deal with regular types of business, I've put all the other trappings of a regular meeting in, so we will have public input in this meeting as well, rather than sometimes a special meeting doesn't have all of those pieces to it. But for tonight, it will. Council, we have an agenda that's been circulated. Actually, first let's address the issue of resolution to hold a public meeting without the public in attendance. Will somebody move that motion? Moved by Councillor Murray, second by Councillor Back. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. All right, we have an agenda, council, that's been circulated. Any errors or omissions from the agenda is presented? Hearing none, will someone on council move the agenda? Moved by Councillor Forbes. Is there a seconder? Councillor Back. Call the question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded? Motion carries. Okay, so the agenda has been adopted. We have so what we've done is we've set up to 30 minutes at the front end of the council meeting for opportunities for public to make presentations to the council. I have a list of people who had signed up to speak on that, and I'm going to work through that process. I'm going to note the time as 7:03. If we run through the speakers list and we still have time, then I'll look to other people who are participating in the meeting if anybody else would like to add their comments at that time, but it's only if time permits. And so at this point, I'm going to invite our first public speaker, Barry Marshall, followed by Sarah Fakari. Barry Marshall, you have 3 minutes to address council. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Mayor.
Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you. I wanted to begin by thanking the district for the opportunity to and their attention to this matter for the signage variances. And we've had great cooperation and support from staff in your planning department. We wanted to assure you that we have had extensive previous experience with this type of matter throughout Metro Vancouver, including a DVP signage for the successful Northwoods Village in the District of North Vancouver at Dollarton Highway. I believe several of the councillors, maybe the mayor himself, yourself, has toured that development at the end of stage 1, and I know there was a design panel toured it in just as recently as 2018. We worked on that one from the 2014 to 2018 period, and we've been working on with the same kind of issues on District of North for the Lynn Valley Center, which is what we're addressing tonight. The sign variances shown here appear complicated when you first look at them, but they're essentially necessitated by an acknowledged out-of-date sign bylaw, and the fact that this is a large mixed-use project, multi-phased, has gone over for a number of years from 2015 to the present day. Our client, Boza Development, has instructed us and encouraged us all along to meet all criteria that the city requires under the design guidelines for a village type environment. And we started the project with Eric Wilhelm and Michael Hartford back in 2015, and we feel we've worked well with them to get us to the proposals you're looking at tonight. So we're hoping that the council will show broad support for this variance as is planning, and I'm here to address any questions. And I believe we have at least one of our clients and one of our senior designers is also on standby, and we have the document that was provided to council that we can share the screen and address any details if they're required. So thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I have Sarah Fakari followed by Sandy Goldie. Sarah Fakari, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes, can you hear me?
Welcome. Yes, I can. You have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. Thank you for your time tonight. In the interest of time, I'm going to be reading from my notes. My name is Sarah Fakari. I am the Vice President of Marvel Developments, a small family-owned and operated company in North Vancouver, which owns the Travelodge property. I moved to Vancouver 23 years ago and went to UBC to obtain a master's degree in electrical engineering. While at UBC, I lived at a condo at Woodcroft for a number of years. After working as an engineer for about 7 years, I switched to real estate and development about 10 years ago. We started conversations with the DMV staff about 7 years ago, even before we purchased the Travelodge property. Many people have been instrumental in shaping the development before you today, including Tamsin Guppy, Brian Bidwell, Susan Haid, Alfonso Tejada, and most recently, Casey Peters. We are very grateful to them all. During the past few years, I have watched the neighboring projects at Lionsgate Village get approvals and start construction. I can't help but think that our project is the missing piece to the jigsaw. We are aware of the need for affordability and sustainability, and we are collaborating with Mr. Geller because of his work on the sustainable community at Simon Fraser University. Over the last few weeks, we have heard council's concerns about the projects proposing condominium buildings versus the need for more rental housing. Firstly, I have to say that as an active realtor and a young citizen of the community, I know that there are a lot of people who were born and raised on the North Shore and who would want to come back to the North Shore, but they want to buy and not rent. Secondly, we felt that there is adequate supply of market rental housing in the Lionsgate Village, especially since the Larco project is now 100% rental. But having heard the council comments loud and clear, we have decided to offer a percentage of the condo units on a rent-to-own basis, as well as the Locals First sales program, offering North Shore residents a 5% discount under the list price. This is in addition to the affordable rental housing building already offered in our project. In conclusion, we have been waiting patiently for over 2.5 years, awaiting the staff response to our application. Please don't make us wait another 2.5 years until the OCP review is completed. We very much want to work with staff to finalize our project. Once we have rezoning approval, we promise to proceed immediately with development and building permits and start construction. In this way, we can minimize disruption for the many new residents moving into the adjacent buildings. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I have Sandy Goldie followed by Rubens Rahim.
Okay.
Ms. Goldie, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you so much. I'm speaking to agenda item, I believe it's 3.6, the greenhouse gas intensity limits. And first of all, I really want to applaud you, the council, for being climate leaders in your declarations and policies thus far. Your understanding of how essential it is for us to reach the IPCC targets for greenhouse gas emissions, frankly, helps me sleep at night. As a climate reality leader and a facilitator of classes based on the book, Drawdown, the most comprehensive plan ever proposed to reverse global warming, I know the serious nature of the challenges that we're facing. And I've been reading Seth Klein's new book, A Good War, and I'm aware that the only thing stopping us as a society from preserving this planet for future generations is the will to do what we know how to do. So together we can face down this climate crisis and create a livable future. I strongly urge you to vote yes on this proposal, which would end the use of fossil fuels in new construction and encourage the use of heat pumps, which are cost competitive with fossil gas heating and so much better for the environment. So please continue to make such forward-thinking policy decisions leading to the elimination of all greenhouse gas emissions from buildings in North Vancouver. As an environmental educator, I'm so grateful to live in a district that is moving as quickly as possible in the necessary direction. And as a new grandmother, I join with you in envisioning the future we are helping to make possible for our children and grandchildren. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Okay, my next speaker is Rubens Rahim, followed by Shantella Blazer.
Thank you, Council. I'm speaking today about the new proposed changes to the nuisance bylaw specifically around the restriction around Christmas lights having to be switched off at 11 o'clock. Given the low number of complaints and the large number of pressing issues facing the district, I have to question why we are trying to overregulate such a simple thing as when a property owner can turn on and off their lights on their property, impacting the entire district when there's such a low number of complaints that people who seem to be offended by these Christmas lights being on and possibly shedding light on their property. Given that we live in a metropolitan area, it's not reasonable to expect complete darkness. There are street lights, traffic. This is part of living in the city, and the Christmas lights do add cheer to the generally dreary winter time that we have here in Vancouver. I would also note the specific time date limits for the display of holiday lights being restricted to Christmas times and Halloween, which is specifically a very Christian-centric view of things. There's many other cultures and festivals that are celebrated in the district, and this bylaw is preferring one over the other and would seem to make the display of any holiday lighting illegal for the rest of the year that may be celebrated by other cultures. There also seems to be sections where the RCMP can enter your property without a warrant to enforce the sections of the bylaw, which seems extremely draconian since generally under the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, they are entitled to or required to get a warrant before entering your property. But this bylaw seems to just skip over all the charter protections in order to inspect your property for Christmas lights or holiday light compliance, which seems completely ludicrous. So in conclusion, I would ask Council to reconsider this bylaw and instead pass something more specific for actual significant neighbor nuisances around, extremely bright lights shining into someone's bedroom, for example, rather than a blanket prohibition on lighting after 11 o'clock, and remove any references to Christian-specific holidays. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rahim. Fair comment. I will just say that this is the first time that the council has considered the matter. This came as a staff recommendation following a public workshop over a year ago. So we'll get to see what the council's comments are on the matter. I have Shantella Blazer. If I've got that wrong, please correct me, followed by Hazen Colbert. Ms. Blazer?
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. You're
Great.
welcome to address council for 3 minutes.
Thank you very much. Good evening, Mayor Little and councillors. As there are other community members watching as well, I would like to say good evening to our community in attendance. I would like to take this opportunity to speak to the proposed amendments to the nuisance abatement bylaws that would impact outdoor lighting, including holiday lighting. At the heart of what I'd like to communicate today is that we are part of a warm, vibrant, and caring community. We are all acutely aware that we're in the midst of a global pandemic, and sharing a little bit of joy, happiness, and a sense of community at this time is of increased importance and value. There are many major issues that require Council's guidance and attention during these times, and I'm fully supportive of Council and district staff having the opportunity to focus on those important issues that can support district residents. Rather than the mayor, council, and staff having to spend countless hours, as they have, focused on complaints such as the 3 complaints relating to seasonal lighting received over the past 5 years, as evidenced in the report supporting today's agenda, I know that there is much better use that can be made of your valuable time in order to benefit our community as a whole. As for the outdoor lighting issue itself, Having outdoor lighting generally is important for many reasons, but I would like to focus on 2. Number 1, joy. For many people, lighting is representative of brightness and cheer. This is a way for us to share joy during holidays, any holidays that are important to any culture, in times especially now where we must remain physically distant. And number 2, outdoor lighting is also a safety measure and a tool that community members can employ, which comes recommended time and time again from many sources, such as our RCMP and Blockwatch sections. In closing, I would like to submit that, number 1, there is no problem here that needs to be fixed, as evidenced by the extremely low single-digit complaints that were received. Number 2, for those that may not appreciate outdoor lighting, there are some steps that these people can take to limit the impact of light, such as closing window coverings. And number 3, the holidays are a special time for many people, particularly during the pandemic. So let's support a greater number of people feeling joy and cheer. Thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thank you very much. I have Hazen Colbert, followed by Chris Kostyuk. Mr. Colbert, can you hear me? Mr. Clerk, can I just check in with you? I don't see, oh, I do see Mr. Colbert on the call. I'll try again. Mr. Colbert, can you hear me? Okay.
And Your Worship, we can try to unmute his microphone ourselves.
Well, let's not do that.
I'm sorry, I believe my mic, Mr. Gordon, my mic is already unmuted.
Okay, I can hear you now, Mr. Colbert.
Thank you, Mr. Little. Thank you, Mayor Little. Mayor Little, I've got 2 things I want to address. The first one, and I'm going to skate as best I can around certain issues that I am aware of with respect to the proposal for the travel lodge. I would ask staff to do an exceptionally deep review of the proponents and genuinely who the true proponents are of this project. The name of Marvell Group has been presented. I am well aware of the business of Marvell and the amount of capital they have. This is a small family-owned business with 6 to 10 employees that generates about $1.5 million in sales a year. The owner of the company lives in an $11 million home in West Vancouver. And I'm not being critical. I want to be very clear. I'm not being critical. It is an unusual situation for a company that earns $1.5 million in revenue for the owner to live in an $11 million home. I would only ask that staff do a very detailed and deep review of who is involved in this matter. Okay. Now, Mayor Little, I'm done with that. I want to move on to the Christmas lights.
Thank you.
I have some experience in my life with respect to neighbors who have bullied other neighbors using Christmas lights and sound, etc. What we found, and this occurred some years ago, was that using bylaws didn't work because they just moved their lighting inside. And it was an ingenious thing they did, which prevented them from being controlled by the bylaw. And the only result was all the good people, and we're talking about, 1,000 good people were impacted negatively by one person. And Mayor Little, I think you and I both know that that's not, we don't want to do that. We don't want to hit an ant with a hammer. We want to manage what's best for the whole community, Mayor Little, and council. So I think that it's time that we pull this particular matter off the agenda to address it in other ways. And Mayor Little, one of the ways that we can address this is by helping the parties that might be involved in disputes access mediation and arbitration through the province of BC. Those processes, mediation and arbitration, are very valuable. And I think that the municipality would achieve a great more success using and accessing that process than hammering other people, good people, by the way, like yourself, who I was told that this morning the media were outside your house trying to photograph and video your lights, which I thought was so inappropriate, Mayor Little. I got to tell you, I thought that was wrong. we don't want to have that type of thing happening. You and your family absolutely deserve to have peace and quiet enjoyment in your home at 6 a.m. Thank you, Mayor Little.
Thank you, Mr. Colbert. Had I known they were coming, I would have turned the Christmas lights on, but afraid I missed on that. I have Chris Kostiak followed by Frank Ducote. Mr. Kostiak, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, you have 3 minutes to address council.
All right, thank you. Good evening, Mayor Little and councilors. This time of year is quite dark and cold, and celebrating the holidays like Halloween and Christmas brings so much joy to the children and adults alike in our neighborhood. My young family is located across from a beautiful playground. So many young children marvel at our very tasteful and simple strands of white lights on our home and in our trees. Even the adults often compliment the lighting and landscaping. We've attempted to provide light, warmth, safety, and security in the neighborhood. I believe this is a time for bringing together community and supporting efforts that instill joy and happiness. As this community and indeed the world faces a most challenging time with catastrophic impact from the pandemic, I certainly support the move to create an atmosphere of warmth and light with Christmas lights throughout our community. To that end, we applaud the district each year in early November when you don Edgemont Boulevard and other streets with seasonal lighting. This is a gift to us all. I'm also concerned that just 3 complaints over the last 5 years about seasonal lighting and repeated complaints stemming from one individual has translated into requested changes to our bylaws. The district has held a number of workshops on this matter and countless hours of staff's time just to address these complaints. There isn't a problem here that needs to be resolved. Speaking with members of council, it has been noted that the deep probe into changing lighting bylaws has been a waste of resources. So I question why this matter and the requested bylaw changes have been pressed forward. And after researching further, I was surprised to learn about some questionable behavior by Councillor Murray. Councillor Murray has been specifically requesting bylaw changes and specifically targeting individual property, just like during the Pigeon Gate scenario, where bylaw changes were being used to target a specific resident.
Mr. Kostiak, if you can make your comments without casting aspersions on an individual, I'd appreciate that. It's just not time for it.
Okay. In fact, a specific councillor has made a written request to the district general manager, planning properties and permits approving officer, asking if changing a noise bylaw and adding a light abatement policy will apply directly to an individual address. And that address was a subject of her email. I'm concerned about what seems to be a pattern of questionable conduct.
That sounds all like fairly conventional conduct for elected officials, Mr. Kostiak. I think all of us have jobs to communicate with staff and advance matters. Do you have any other concerns you wish to raise?
Yeah, I would like to close, but I don't think this is a systemic issue affecting the entire council. In fact, we've enjoyed discussions with many of the council members, including yourself, and you've been delightful. Please stop this overreach with regard to unnecessary bylaw changes. I would encourage council to instead devote time to supporting measures that create joy and happiness and focus attention on tackling critical issues like housing, transportation, and supporting the frontline heroes, businesses, individuals committed to pulling us all through this stressful time. And now is a time for warmth, light, hope, and kindness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Kostiak. I have Frank Ducote followed by Lori Parkinson. Mr. Ducote, are you able to hear me? Just checking in, Mr. Gordon. I think Mr. Ducote is on one of the phone-in lines. Does that mean we have to unmute him? How about that?
Thank you very much. Now? Yeah, I can hear you now. I hope you can hear me. Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'd like to speak on about the travel lodge application before you.
Yes,
and just to thank you very much. I was the senior urban designer at the time of the planning of both the OCP and the local area plan, including Lionsgate Village, or Lower Capilano, as it was calling it back then. And I had the pleasure of working with Brian Bidewell, Susan Haid, Jennifer Patton, Tom Lancaster, and Tamsin Guppy, and others on this project and other town centers, all of the town centers for that matter. And I'm here to address just a few things about the plan at that time and the proposal before you without diving into details. Number one, I think it's essential really to complete the village plan. This is not only the last big piece, it's probably the last important piece. And it's sort of a hinge between the boundary at West Vancouver and the rest of the village. And I think that's a very important site, sort of a keystone site, almost in real shape. And it delivers so many positive benefits the park, the road through, and various forms of housing, including non-market rental housing. I think it's very, very important to complete the village, deliver these public benefits. And as to the idea of the taller tower, then we're in the guidelines. Guidelines are very, very important in the early days of the development of an area. After that, you're responding to conditions as they emerge. And in this particular case, the plan we had at the time, and still on the books, called for a very fat tower in order to keep that height low. I think that's a bad form in retrospect, and I think taller is more elegant, especially if it helps deliver the benefits that are outlined. Unless there's some questions, I'd like to leave it right there. Thank you very much.
Very much. I have Lori Parkinson. Can you hear me, Lori Parkinson?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me, Mayor?
Yes, I can. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you. Mayor and councilors, thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I'm going to be speaking on agenda item 3.6, BC Energy Step Code and Greenhouse Gas Intensity Targets. Thank you for taking another important step on the path to eliminate greenhouse gas emissions in new buildings. In some ways, District of North Vancouver is a real leader on the North Shore in this low carbon quest. You are already going ahead with low carbon emissions in new buildings that are under construction or are being planned for construction, which is really impressive. However, I don't know if you're aware, last March, District of West Vancouver passed a climate bylaw that requires space, heat, and hot water to be done by heat pumps, not by electric heat. In most buildings, the low carbon pathway will be fulfilled by installation of electric heat for rooms and hot water. Why? Developers generally prefer to install electric heat. It's familiar to them. They don't have to figure out space use differently. Change is hard for all of us. And electric heat is cheap to buy and install. So why are heat pumps such a good idea? They're much fairer to the resident financially. Monthly power bills from electric heat are 3 times that from a heat pump. That's right, electric heat will cost residents 3 times per month for what they'd pay for heat with a heat pump. We know that the North Shore is an expensive place to live. Electric heat will not help a resident's pocketbook. Secondly, heat pumps use a lot less energy to heat a room than electric heaters use. There are concerns about running short of electricity if we switch from natural gas heating to mostly electric heating. We won't have that problem if builders install heat pumps. So I would really be happy if you followed District of West Vancouver's wise lead 9 months ago and required your low carbon pathway to be accomplished by heat pumps. Also, I encourage you to vote yes on your energy step code and greenhouse gas intensity limits. You're doing great work. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lori Parkinson. And as every speaker went near full time, I think the public input period has now elapsed. And so I'm going to return to the regular regular agenda items. Just a note, though, we do have 3 more speakers coming later on in the meeting. They'll be speaking to individual items in the individual reports. At this point, we're going to move to item 3.1. This is development permit 33.20. This is the signage considerations on the Lynn Valley facility. Mr. Milburn, will you be making the first comments on the matter?
Well, thank you, Worship. Mr. Hartford will have a brief verbal introduction, after which we're happy to answer questions. Thank you.
Mr. Hartford, floor is yours.
Thank you, Your Worship. Your Worship, members of council, as a brief overview of the application, I can provide the following comments. This is an application for a minor development permit with variances to allow for the installation of a comprehensive sign package for Lynn Valley Center. Under the district sign bylaw, variances to the bylaw are handled through an application for a minor development permit with one or more variances. The Lynn Valley Center site is a comprehensive mixed-use development spanning 2 parcels and totals approximately 10 acres in size. The sign package proposed includes directory and directional signage for efficient wayfinding around this large and complex site, as well as mall and tenant signage and building and parkade entrance signage. The district sign bylaw is structured to deal best with conventional signage installations such as a tenant sign on a retail outlet, but it does not deal well with complex multi-use projects that span multiple parcels such as Lynn Valley Center. Variances being proposed in the application include the size of signage, the type of signage, and the number of signs and sign types on each of the 2 properties affected. The intent for development in Lynn Valley Town Center is to reflect a mountain village character and create a comfortable pedestrian environment and a quality shopping experience, all as outlined in the Lynn Valley Town Center Public Realm Design Guidelines. The variances in this application are for signage that is consistent with the previously issued development permit for the site, as well as the applicable design guidelines. Notification for the application was undertaken in early October with a total of 953 letters to the neighborhood. No concerns were expressed with the proposal at that time. Development permit 33.20 is recommended for issuance this evening. And you heard earlier from Mr. Barry Marshall, the applicant on the project. So he's available to answer questions, as is staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartford. I have Councillor Murray, and then I think I saw Councillor Back's hand. Councillor Murray.
I'll move the recommendation.
Okay, recommendation is moved. Councillor Back, will you be seconding the
I'll
recommendation?
second the recommendation, yeah.
Thank you very much. Councillor Murray, go ahead.
Thank you. I just have a question as Northwoods Village was brought up as an example. And I note that there is a bit of a challenge with the signage in placement at Northwoods Village on Dollarton when you're exiting onto Dollarton Highway, heading west. Sort of at the where the Starbucks is. There's a wall sign which sort of looks like the same kind of sign that's on page 7 of the report, and it's actually quite difficult to see the traffic. Now on Dollarton there's 2 challenges: the speed of the traffic that's coming up sort of on a curved road, and then the other issue is the multi-use path that winds along Dollarton. And so I just wanted to make sure that these signs at intersections are set back significantly enough that when you are trying to take a right, like on a red or a green, that you, but particularly I guess on a red, that you're going to have good sight lines, because the sight lines at Northwoods are a bit challenging, and I have concerns about that sort of wall look of a sign at the entrances and exits. So I'm just wondering if I could have a comment on that.
Mr. Hartford.
Your Worship, Councillor Murray, the variance application being considered this evening does not allow for the signs to actually be installed. There would still be a sign permit process for each of the signs, and compliance with the sign bylaw for setbacks and visibility, particularly at intersections, would be something reviewed. But certainly, given that it's been raised as part of tonight's consideration, that could be taken into account as part of the sign permit process.
That would be good, because I would just say that the Northwoods Village, I assume they didn't apply for variance in regards to their signage. It was under our existing bylaw, and you know, I would actually request that staff go and visit Northwoods just to see some of these problems with the signs, because it is challenging. And just in regards to the wayfinding, which the signs are certainly going to help with, I was up at Lynn Valley Mall the other day to visit the new Save on Foods, and I parked in the existing parking lot over by the Safeway. And the new wayfinding for people that are parking on the surface parking lot into Save-On is actually through a garden bed. And it's actually been suppressed enough that there's a muddy path that people are using to get into that entrance. And I just wanted to take this opportunity before I forget to bring that to staff's attention. And the developers may want to look at that internal access from that surface parking lot into the mall, because people have already found shortcuts to get to the front door, because there's no real clear way in that center parking lot as to how you get in. And I think there's, you know, maybe a walk down towards 27th or up towards sort of the center of the mall to get in. And I think people just want to head right into Save-On. So I just bring that to your attention, but thank you.
Your Worship, thank you for bringing that to our attention. We're happy to have staff follow up on those two issues.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. Thank you, Mr. Hartford. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Councillor Back, you were the seconder on the motion. Do you have any further comments?
Yes, no, I don't have any comments, Your Worship. I'm supportive of the staff recommendation.
Thank you very much. Next hand up is Councillor Curran. Do you have comments on this matter?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask staff or the applicant if we have a design guidelines for how signage is accessible for people with disabilities, if staff could comment on if that's a district policy and it will be applied here, or how it applies to signage and wayfinding.
Mr. Hartford, accessible signage.
Yeah, Your Worship, Councillor Curran, there is no specific reference in the sign bylaw or the sign design guidelines that are attached to the sign bylaw regarding accessibility. So I don't have a good answer to your question.
Could I ask that we address that as part of a broader issue, but it's something that has come up from folks. So I just want to make sure that we are using any policies that we can to ensure that we are being inclusive. Thank you.
Mr. Marshall, do you have any comments on accessibility, high contrast signs, etc.?
Yeah, if you can give, can you hear me and see me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, no, I think that's an excellent question, and it's something that is pursued at the design stage, and it may not be specifically laid out in this particular sign application, but I can assure you that we are members of an international organization called SEGD. It's a worldwide organization on creating effective wayfinding and signage. And we follow the ADA and the Canadian equivalents of the American for Disabilities Act in all signage design. So you'll find that legibility, placement, like height placement for things like cane swing. So there's not, that's something that I didn't know about until a few years ago. So that people with less accessibility are not prevented from easy passage past freestanding signs. So certainly legibility, color contrast, illumination, and even the type of font that is used, while not specifically outlined in a municipal or a district sign bylaw, has been pursued and implemented in this scheme that's been presented to the district. I'm happy to address any other questions you have on it.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. Any further comments?
Just that it seems to be a gap that's reliant on the applicant. So I just want to make sure that if there is a policy gap that we close it on our end.
Thank you very much. I am the district council rep on the advisory committee for disabilities issues. I'll work with our staff to get that on ACDI's agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, I see no further hands from councillors. So I will call the question on the motion. It's moved and seconded by Councillors Murray and Back. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Council. And Mr. Hartford. Okay, moving on to item 3.2. This is the on-street parking corporate policy, alternative vehicle parking rates, and administrative policy. And I see our transportation group coming onto the call at this time. Mr. Carney, are you going to be introducing the item?
Through your worship, I think Mr. Ono will provide an introduction.
Okay. Mr. Ono, I don't see your camera on. Oh, there you are. Okay, fantastic. Mr. Ono.
think I'm hanging around out here. Can you hear me, Your Worship? Hopefully
Yes,
my
I can.
audio.
Again, it's a little bit soft, so nice and loud.
Okay, we'll try that again. Is that better?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. So Your Worship, we're pleased to be here this evening to present to Council the on-street parking corporate policy for Council's consideration and approval. This matter is being considered Council during previous Council workshops, and 7 goals have been endorsed by Council, and 3 tools were endorsed by Council as well. And we've also considered direction from Council to simplify the policy, so we have amended the policy based on that direction. And we now have an objective policy that will provide direction to staff that can be applied district-wide on a consistent basis. It's versatile enough to suit site-specific needs, but it will also be able to adjust to seasonal variations and to local preferences. And also attached for completeness in the council package on the report is the on-site parking rates administrative policy that is actually an update to a 2014 reduced parking rates for multi-unit residential buildings development applications policy that we've been working to. So that policy is an administrative policy. It's really a formula that approach that staff uses in order to make sure that we're consistent when we consider any reductions to Part 10 of the zoning bylaw for the base rates of parking in multi-unit residential building applications. And we also have added or expanded that to be more current with the most recent apartment parking rates study that Metro Vancouver and TransLink have conducted. So that was just recently completed in 2018. So we've adjusted some of the policy recommendations there for staff level use, and we've also added more TDM options that are becoming available or becoming used in the development industry now. So ultimately, for the on-site portion, council has the final authority to approve the rates that are recommended based on this formula that staff use, and it's really meant for transparency for developers and for consistency for staff to use. So with that, Your Worship, I have with me here Mr. Carney, the Section Manager of Transportation, as well as Benesha Ramani, who is our transportation engineer, who worked on these policies, and they're all here to help answer any questions you may have. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much. Members of council, I don't see any hands yet at this point. Councillor Muri, do you have a motion in mind, or?
Yeah, well, I'll move the motion.
Okay. Is there a seconder for the staff recommendation? Councillor Bond. Councillor Muri, go ahead.
Thank you. You know, these types of policies are only as good as how they impact a given area. And certainly parking and traffic is number one, although today it was Christmas lights issue in the district. And it has, you know, we've seen a lot of impact from the car development in the district and on the North Shore, cumulative totals of traffic, and parking in areas for all sorts of different reasons. The Cove has huge parking issues. Lynn Valley has parking issues. Certainly people visiting the canyon and the headwaters, Mount From. There's parking issues. We've got resident parking only all over up there. We're trying to deal with parking in Deep Cove. It's a challenge. It's a dead end, you know, village in the community of Seymour. And we're adding a lot more people through density to our neighborhoods. And there's going to be challenges for sure. So I had suggested many years ago, and certainly the Lower Lynn area, to look at an area where, we made it a more of a car-free zone. That was not supported by council, that concept during a discussion. It didn't really take off anywhere, although I had quite a lot of young people kind of give me the thumbs up in regards to that concept, because it's close to Phibbs Exchange, it's flat, you can ride a bike. There's, services in the area, you sort of have everything. So why do you need a car? But, when you build development and certainly market development and you go up that high, 26, 28, 30 stories, and you captivate those views, there's going to be big zeros attached to the price of those market units. And those market units want convenience, and they want a car. So I think there's obviously flexibility, as Mr. Ono pointed out, that council will have sort of the final say on this. But I think one of the challenges that's been left out, and maybe I've missed it, so correct me if I'm wrong, I'll use Northwoods Village as an example again. But one of the issues with Northwoods Village that's a bit of a problem is that the parking in the underground for the rental units, you actually have to pay for. And it's a concept that the district really hasn't, we don't have much experience with it, because most of the developments we have are surface-based parking, and we haven't had to look at or feel the impact of development companies charging for parking spots. So in the case of Northwoods Village, the people that live in those rental units park on the street. But then there's a whole commercial business area as well, and there's no parking there. Employees of Stong's are asked to park across the street behind the Esso station next to the train tracks. So I would ask staff, how are we going to deal with one of the contributors of this parking challenge, being the developments that council approves or don't approve? And the cost of these parking spots being added on to the cost of these units, or in addition to, and it's not just market units, it's rental units, it's below market rental units in some cases, and it is contributing to this challenge. So could I have a comment on that? Wish I had a clock to know how long I'm talking for. We got to add that as a little,
we have a little
icon.
bell, but we're cautious in using it. Yeah, Mr. Carney, are you lined up for your response? Oh, Mr. Ono. Mr. Ono, go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship. So part of the reason that both of the policies are brought forward together in this report, so the on-street parking policy, as well as the alternative vehicle parking rates on-site administrative policy, is because both systems work to complement each other. So this is the on-site piece and the on-street piece. So the on-street piece, if some of the tools that council has provided or would provide by approving the on-street parking policy is anything ranging from resident parking only to time restricted parking with possibly resident exemptions, right through to pay parking on the street. So coordinating those regulations on the street side relative to parking availability on the private side then starts to dictate where and how parking is used both on private side and public side. So it's really got to be a fully integrated model. And there's data that we need, and there's parameters that we need in order to be able to evaluate how best to set those regulations and use those different regulations and tools in order to manage that parking inventory, Your Worship.
I use my second time, Mayor Little.
Yes, Councillor Murray.
Okay, how much time do I have left? 4 minutes? Oh, good, thank you.
Your Worship, there's 30 seconds remaining on your first 4 minutes, and then your other 2 minutes. So 2.5.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So those are that's good. We're looking at a totally integrated concept, and certainly as we move forward with gentle consideration for development, although I really believe that we have to feel some of the build out of all of these developments, because in many cases they're 5 years in construction, and we really need to feel like we need to be able to feel what the impact's going to be. But I always, speak from experience or what I know and talking to people. And I'll tell you the affordable units that were given back to the municipality in regards to the community amenity contribution at Sealand off the highway on Fern Street. The affordable units, I think there's something like 75 units, if I'm not mistaken, or 80 units in there. They're sort of the ones that wrap around the corner on the road. They don't have parking. So many of those people that do have cars, they park on the road. Those are some of the challenges that I have with parking going forward, because a lot of decisions have been made irrespective of the challenges of parking. I know the supportive housing on Oxford Street, the previous council, some members of it suggested that people that were visiting may want to go park in the Canadian Tire parking lot. That's the closest one in the area. It's a landlocked area and it's going to be very challenging. I would also ask council to go visit areas such as Old Dollarton Highway, which is empty right now, and a lot of the commercial businesses off Dollarton actually park on that road, and it will give you sort of a taste of the challenges that we face moving forward with people coming into a business area and working. And then finally, I would just say lessons learned. If we knew what we knew now, maybe we would have looked at that Dollarton Business Park a little bit differently, because on the weekends and in the evenings, those lots are empty. And it would have been nice to be able to consider some multi-use in regards to those lots. It could have been considered during the zoning. And certainly Deep Cove has done that for many, many years with the limited parking they have in Deep Cove, which is the Yacht Club, Arms Reach, and the businesses that use that occupy the retail spaces on Gallant Avenue. They all share parking depending on the times of day that their business is open. And it's been something that has worked quite well given the limited challenges of area for parking in the Cove. So I think this is always going to be something that is evolving, and we're going to have to test all sorts of different things and consider changes in the future and new ideas. And hopefully we won't be Carmageddon, because it's not fun for any of us. Thank you.
Thank you. And that was the bell for testing there. I don't know if you could hear it.
Perfect. Thank you, Mayor Little.
I believe Councillor Bond, you were the seconder on the motion. Do you have any comments to add?
Yeah, a few comments. Some things that I'm quite happy to see in this report are a accommodation for unbundling of parking in new housing projects. Something I've been mentioning for a long time is that we should be providing people more options to move away from car dependence in our municipality. I think in the district we're in a tough spot that a lot of traditionally suburban car dependent car design communities have, is that we are no longer efficient or rural enough to be using a personal vehicle all the time for all of our needs, but we're not quite urban enough to be relying on some of the more public transit and active transportation modes that allow us to get around more efficiently. So I think we're kind of in this weird spot and a challenging spot for a lot of our residents who still need a vehicle to fulfill many of their daily duties, but aren't provided with the other options for able to reduce that. So I think any ways that we can put forward to increase those options, I think, and allow people to make different choices, I think are important. So having some accommodations for the unbundling of parking. So if someone wants to purchase or rent a building, not necessarily having to purchase a parking stall along with it, I think that's important. Also, I think in our town centers, as Councillor Murray mentioned, we are in that challenging time where we have a few of the projects planned over the next 20 or 25 years that have been built. And we are still in that area where a lot of the services that are envisioned in those town centers are not yet provided. And I think this policy, the combination of the on-street, district-owned land and how we manage parking on the street and how we also apply those rules into private areas is needed to help us manage through that transition, where right now we probably are seeing more vehicles being used and more vehicles being parked than would be envisioned in 10 or 15 years. And I think these two policies working together will help us move and transition through that time into an area where the vision of our town centers as walkable, complete, close-knit communities are going to be realized. So it's going to be obviously a change and a challenge, but I think these two policies together will help us get there.
Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Curran.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing back the report, staff. I have a few questions and just a few comments. So my first comment would be, I think that I always like to look at parking as a symptom of a system that's not working. So a system of mobility where the most convenient option is actually also the most sustainable option, because right now it just happens to be that the most convenient option is the least sustainable option. And so looking at ways to do that, and I know in this community it's a challenge. It was designed for cars. That's how it was designed. And so now we're realizing that that's not sustainable, and also the externalities are never accounted for. Health impacts, climate impacts, affordability impacts, space, etc. So I always want to make sure that we're looking at this as just a symptom, not the solution. But I think it's an important step to be addressing it. We had, at least I had talked about financial impacts for, and I think looking at what's happening around the world, we're moving in that direction where we start actually valuing street space in a different way. So could staff speak to, there's nothing in the report about costs for permits, and I know across the district now it's quite different. So the good news is if you're someone who doesn't need a permit, then you don't have to pay for one. Could staff speak to that, the costing piece, or where they see that? Thank you.
Yes, through your worship, I can provide a response. The intent is for the policy to be cost neutral in terms of the residential parking permit aspect. And so we're not proposing any changes to the cost at this time. I believe the cost for residential parking permits is approximately $30 per year. I know that in some areas of the District of North Vancouver, annual permits are not required. However, we will be moving towards standardizing that. And so that would be the intent it would be to achieve some consistency across the district.
Okay, thank you. Just for the record, I do support there being fees associated with this. I think it's an important step, and it can be increasing over time, recognizing that we aren't there. We don't have the mobility options that we need. But so I think that's important. And then there's always concerns expressed by any parking changes disproportionately impacting either low income or people with disabilities. So always ensuring that that's top of mind with those policies, I think, is really important. And this is a tough nut to crack, and it's going to take all of us really working together in a new way. And I'm pleased to see that there is some action happening, and it's going to be hard, but we've got to push through this, and we've got to allocate space. We've got to model the behavior that we want, right? And I know there's challenges to doing that. It's not something we can do on our own, but this is huge. It's our highest, transportation is our highest emitter. So it's having grave health impacts both on people and on the planet. So I look forward to understanding better, and this is something I keep bringing up with staff, but like really understanding the impact to different decisions that we make. So when we're making decisions, we can say, what's the carbon impact of that decision, and use that as a metric rather than as a maybe outcome that happened. Oh, that was good. Because we do see that a lot in reports, like this has a positive, positive environmental impact, but we need to be more prescriptive about what that is to achieve 45% reduction in what is now 9 years. So thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. I have Councillors Back and Bond. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, staff, for bringing this report back. I think this is a really great overarching strategy, or a policy rather, to finally have around this important issue. Like Councillor Bond, I was pleased to see the unbundling option in here. I think that is puts us on the right path forward in one way. Also the car share incentive, and I wonder if staff could comment on just a brief comment on car shares in town centers currently, and what success we've had, and how important a aspect we see as that being of this current strategy. And policy.
Can you speak to that?
I can make a quick comment. So, Your Worship, unfortunately, what we've seen so far with interest in car share is less interest in the District of North Vancouver and more interest in the City of North Vancouver. And I think that's generally because of density and where the customers are. It's not that we're not supportive of those car shares, but there is, on the other hand, there is interest building as the town centers gain momentum. So what we're doing, and what you'll see in this policy document, the on-site policy document, is that we've worked very closely with planning, properties and permits, and the development planning group, and with community planning to develop an integrated policy. And that's why it offers up multiple aspects of transportation demand management and incentives, including things like car share, and the ability for developers then to reduce the on-site parking burdens based on offering up car share sites and car share memberships. So this should be the start of really something bigger or better. Mr. Hartford, maybe, I don't want to put him on the spot, but he may be able to comment on some of the more recent successes that we have had with car share in some of the developments that have been have preceded this.
Mr. Hartford?
Your Worship, members of council, I would say that the car share industry is evolving, and we've had a couple of starts and stops, to use a transportation pun. Part of our difficulty is that if a developer enters into an agreement with a specific car share company, and then that company ceases to do business in the district, we may have someone who moved into a building that was reliant on a car share system that no longer exists in their building. We've had other examples where development applicants have actually purchased vehicles, and then those vehicles have been reassigned to other locations by the car share operator. So it's certainly something that the development planning staff take into account on every large project. And as Mr. Ono mentioned, it's an option to reduce reliance on private automobiles. I think over time it will become more and more interesting to residents and developers, particularly as we see a marked decline in the kind of likelihood of car ownership or even having a driver's license for younger members of our population. So we don't have a perfect answer on how to fit car share into every development, but certainly the topic is being raised on every large development.
No, that's great. That's great information, and thank you both. I just think it's important that we do continue to look at it as an important piece. I know a lot of people that do rely on it and would certainly use it more if we had more of it in the community. So thanks very much for the information.
Thank you, Councillor Back. I have Councillors Bond, Forbes, and Hanson. Councillor Bond.
It would be my second time, Mayor Little. I'm not sure if you want to go to other councillors for their first comments.
It's not always sorted out that way on here. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just have a couple of comments and a question. When I'm reading the definitions here about what a frequent transit network is, it's talking about that it's service that runs every 15 minutes and goes throughout the day and into the evening. I find that kind of vague, into the evening. I mean, I know there's some areas that get good public transit service in the evenings, but that can go later than, say, perhaps out Seymour Way, where going into the evening could be something different again. So I'm just commenting that I think there's parts of the definitions that are a little vague. In the rapid bus, it says every day of the week. Well, is every day of the week Monday to Friday, or is every day of the week, Monday to Sunday? So I just think the definitions need to be tightened up a little bit. They're not fully defined given the different areas in the district that have varying degrees of public transit now. Another thing that I just wanted to ask, and maybe somebody could answer for me, is that I'm curious why it seems that when we're looking at base vehicle parking rates, it seems to always be higher for the strata residential, gets a little bit lower for a market rental, and then gets lower again for a non-market rental. Could you explain the data or the rationale that went behind that decision?
Mr. Ono?
Thank you, Your Worship. So, and I'll probably again ask Mr. Hartford to weigh in after this, but the data is usually based on so strata is usually market based, of course, and that means that people generally are more affluent. They purchased. The data that we have, especially the more recent data from Metro Vancouver and the apartment parking policy or parking study that they've provided, and TransLink has been part of that study. It seems to hold true that renters seem to have fewer cars, and if it's non-market, so below market rental, then again the socioeconomics or the social demographic is the economics is a little bit lower, and so again a slightly lower reliance on owned vehicles and possibly more reliance on alternative means like transit. The base rates are actually those base rates that are in Part 10 of the zoning bylaw, and I wasn't part of the writing of Part 10 of the zoning bylaw, so that's where I might ask Mr. Hartford if he has any background on where those numbers came from.
Mr. Hartford?
Your Worship and Council, and to respond to Mr. Ono, I've worked for the district for a long time, but even I was not involved in writing the zoning bylaw in 1965. So the base vehicle rates in the policy, my understanding is, were primarily informed by the data from Metro Vancouver. It was quite an exhaustive survey of hundreds of buildings of all types, strata, market rental, non-market rental, to determine what the load of parking was in each of those buildings, whether there was surplus parking, including vehicle registration analysis to figure out how many cars were registered at each of those properties. It was recognized that the district is a more suburban location. So the policy did not mirror the data from Metro Vancouver. It included a little bit of a cautionary bump above the Metro Vancouver figures. So the base rates in the policy in Table 2 are actually significantly below Part 10 of the zoning bylaw.
Okay, when was that, what year was that data from Metro from and TransLink? Is that current, or is that a couple years old, or?
I'll have to defer to Mr. Ono on that. I believe it is a couple of years old, but it has been, I think the data started in about 2012 and has been updated within the last couple of years.
Yeah, Your Worship, through you, Mr. Hartford's correct. The original study was from 2012, and it was updated and published in 2018.
Okay. I'm just, I'm sensitive to something that has been said to me, and I'm sensitive to it too. The district is now going along the lines of trying to do affordable and social housing. And based on that, that would mean that those types of buildings, wherever they are, whether they're close to transit or not, may not get the required parking that they may need. So, and I'm concerned, someone spoke to me about why do people assume that renters won't have a car? Even if we don't use it all week, we may use it on the weekends. So there's kind of this image that's being propelled here that we think renters won't have cars. And now that we're, as I say, now that we're looking at building more of that kind of housing or even socially subsidized housing, there may be people that need parking. So I'm just reflecting something that was said to me and something that I noticed in the report. The unbundling, I like the idea of unbundling, but unbundling, is that going to pass the unbundling cost saving down to the purchaser of the unit or the renter of the unit, or is that going to just stay the same for them and the developer gets these points when he builds the development?
Yeah, through you, your worship. From what I understand, with unbundled parking, of course, it's so in the most the model I've seen used most is where it's unbundled from ownership. So the purchaser gets to decide if they're going to pay the extra dollars for purchasing a parking stall or two. And very often in those neighborhoods where frequent transit or rapid transit is fairly close to hand, then the total number of stalls eventually gets to the point where it's lower than the total number of units that are available for sale. So if there are surplus parking stalls, then very often in those market developments, my understanding is that those units, the parking stalls remain then with the strata, and the strata decides what they're going to do with them, whether they put them up for pay parking and revenue production, or whether then they make them available for long-term rental or short-term rental, again on a pay basis from someone outside of the residential apartments. I'm also aware that with rental apartment units, that the parking can be unbundled and people can pay for the parking stalls separately from the monthly apartment rental rates. So it provides some flexibility and it provides a pricing mechanism. And in the case of at least the market for sale units, the strata can benefit, I think, from any surplus parking stalls, your worship.
Yes, those are the examples that I'm aware of as well. I just want to make sure that, if there's any way to pass that down to whoever's buying a unit, pass it down to them right up front and the savings up front. That's all that I'm concerned about. I think that's one other comment down at the shared parking. Do you really perceive that it'll be possible that shared parking area is accessible to both commercial and residential visit users?
Through you, your worship, I am aware of examples where that has been successful, where there's a certain volume of parking stalls that are shared so that businesses use them during the day, and then after hours, the residents who've gone off somewhere else to work and taken their vehicle away have been able to then have access to those parking stalls. So yes, I am aware of that model working. But
you don't put specific hours on that, like commercial through these hours and residential or visitor through these hours?
I have seen it set up that way, your worship. I think the most recent example I would have is for the Hollyburn Towers adjacent to the City of North Vancouver City Hall, and but there was an abundance of parking there as well. So some of it was used for market pay parking, and early on, a lot of it sat empty until the parking regulations on street in and around that city of North Vancouver City Hall got more stringent. And then a lot of those renters in the Hollyburn Towers started getting driven back into making use of those parking stalls, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you very much for the answers. Thank you.
Milburn, did you have a response as well? Nope.
Your Worship, just in terms of the earlier point about the differential in parking rates between stratified units, rental units, and affordable units, what we presented is really just differences based on empirical evidence, as mentioned by staff in the Metro Vancouver study. But I just wanted to ensure that I acknowledge that Councillor Forbes brings up a good point, and that we always, with every project that comes forward, we also do analysis with the applicant because it will depend the parking demand on the type of clientele. Are they seniors in that facility? Are there caregivers providing and needing parking space? All those kinds of issues need to be considered. And you rightly pointed out that we need to look at each case specifically, and that's why we do when we ask for parking analysis as part of all those significant development applications that come before council.
Thank you, Mr. Milburn. I have Councillor Hanson, followed by Councillor Bond. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. I can say at the outset I support these policies, and they are, of course, the product of extensive discussion in workshops and consensus that was arrived at in workshops amongst this council. On some of the specific points, I support unbundling. I support generally reductions in parking requirements for better affordability, in my view. Given that the cost of living includes not only the cost of housing, but the cost of transportation, I look forward to the day where some of our locations have no parking because there's adequate transportation options and people can live without the requirement of parking their automobile in those properties. Dealing with a couple of specific points, well, specifically the resident parking only, the time limited parking, and the pay parking. Just for the benefit of the public watching, I wonder if staff could say how these are going to be implemented, because of course those initiatives can have significant impact on the way of life of people that are subject to those parking restrictions. And if you could just quickly talk about the procedure by which those parking strategies will be implemented. Thank you very much.
Perhaps Mr. Carney, are you ready to answer that one?
Yes, through your worship, I'd be happy to respond. Thank you for the question, Councillor Hanson. We have established criteria for implementing these restrictions, and this is based on discussions going back to November of last year, and then also we had a follow-up workshop in June of earlier this year. Essentially, what we're proposing is that both local and collector roads would be eligible for RPO, resident only parking, or the resident exempt, the time restricted resident exempt, and so arterial roads would not be eligible for those conditions or restrictions. And we would be looking at certain thresholds in terms of occupancy. And so we've listed 85% occupancy for RPO and 75% for RE. And we did do some research looking at other municipalities in the Lower Mainland, and that is sort of a general consensus in terms of what many other municipalities use for occupancy rates. And in addition to that, I would say that we would be looking for a majority, actually a 2/3 support from the residents within the area for any type of restrictions that may be implemented. And we would also have the ability to control some of these restrictions by either time of day or seasonally. And so it does give staff the ability to sort of tailor the solution to the individual needs. We know that in certain locations, for example, at Lynn Canyon Park, it's very seasonal, whereas in town centers that may be more by day of week. And so this policy is simplified relative to what we brought to council earlier this year, but also gives staff, I think, enough guidance, but enough flexibility to, like I say, tailor the solution to the individual needs. And we know that across the district, depending on the land use and the neighborhoods and the availability of off-street parking, those needs can vary.
Thank you.
Thank you. On to Councillors Bond, Forbes, and Curran. Councillor Bond.
Thank you, Mayor Little. One other point that I wanted to make is that I think during the workshop I mentioned that such progressive transportation cities such as the city of Edmonton have recently moved to eliminating parking minimums across their city in their bylaws. And I know that there's been discussion at council about having areas of the municipality or even individual sites come with no parking as a desire, as a vision. And in the current policy, we still have parking minimums in here. And I think during that workshop, I mentioned if a proponent wants to come forward with a project or something that has zero parking and they think it's going to work for them, I think we should eliminate the barriers for that to happen. So I'm wondering, maybe staff can comment on why there are still parking minimums included in the bylaw, and if someone did want to bring a proposal for a project with no parking because they were willing to take that risk or willing to be innovative in our community, how would they go about getting that, and how would council see that?
Mr. Ono?
Yeah, through your worship. So thank you, Councillor Bond, for the comment. So what one of the comments that Councillor Bond made earlier, that we're not quite built out yet with all of those facilities that will make active transportation alternatives really viable. For example, especially in Lynn Creek, we have gaps in the sidewalk, pedestrian path, bike path. Even some of the transit routes aren't fully complete. The transit stops aren't very appealing right now. So we know that there's going to be some demand for vehicles for a while yet until we get there. And the other thing I guess it's important to keep in mind is that despite that the administrative policy that we would be working to would come up with a number that we would be able to recommend to council, when the zoning application is brought forward to council for final approval, it'll be up to council to decide whether or not council accepts the recommendations of staff on the rates that are supporting the development. So I guess the short answer is we're not quite ready yet in the town centers to accept those rates of zero rates. But if an application comes forward and they really want to do it, then it would be up to council to decide that that's acceptable. Your worship, thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Bond. Councillor Forbes, second time.
Just, I forgot to say thank you to staff for all the hard work for the report. So thank you for the report. It was interesting to read. But I just have two comments, well, three actually. Just one comment to something that was said previously by a councillor, and adequate transit or active transportation doesn't necessarily mean that no parking is needed. I just want to make that point, that just because you have that near you or you're near a good transit system doesn't mean you don't need a car, because people need cars for a lot of different reasons. They may not need it when they're going to work in the morning, they'll take public transit, but they have a family with 4 kids at home and they're trying to get them to different soccer fields or whatever on the weekends. So there are times, and people with injuries and things like that. So just because transit is close isn't a reason to go down to no parking, I don't think. It's a good thing to strive for, but I don't think it's practical. And And as far as the demand for cars, as you said, Mr. Ono, that we're not quite there yet. There's still going to be a demand, you said, for a little while yet. I think there will always be a segment of the population that will need cars, whether it's elderly, medical conditions, families, whatever it is. There's always going to be a segment. That doesn't mean that they can't, if they choose, that doesn't mean that they can have healthier versions of cars on the road, such as electrical vehicles. But I think there's always going to be a segment. There's always going to be an automobile presence. It's not that they're going to disappear off the roads. And the last thing I just want to comment about is what I always comment about when we're talking about changing things and putting in new rules is the rules are only going to be as good as we enforce them. So I hope that when you're looking at all of this, that we also look at, can we really control or enforce these things when we're putting them in? Because if you go to all this work to do such a good report and then we don't manage what we've actually written about, then I think it's lost. And so we need to always think about that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Mr. Stewart, I might have missed you on a comment about the previous speaker. Did you have something you wanted to say?
No, Your Worship. I think actually Councillor Forbes has made the comment that I wanted to make, which is irrespective of all the city planning that we do, we have to be pragmatic and practicable, especially in a transition zone of probably 10 to 20 years. There's going to be a need for parking. And if the parking isn't on site, as these developments are improved, they will be on our streets. So we need to be practical about this. There will be a need for vehicles. Mass transit will not be the only solution in Vancouver for the next 40 years. So just, we need to be pragmatic about that.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I have Councillors Curran and Hanson. Councillor Curran.
That was an excellent segue to my discussion about land use. So I do think that when we talk about why do you need to drive places, it's because of the way that things are designed. So obviously we're making progress towards that in our town centers, and other councillors have brought up the point of reducing the amount of car trips, certainly acknowledging that for some people, cars are the best mobility option. And I think that's why foundational to our policies should be accessibility, equity, especially for people with disabilities, seniors, etc. Anyone who needs it, this isn't about, and I worry sometimes that the conversation becomes this binary, which is not what it should be about. I think in terms of, in my experience, there's lots of young folks that never really come to show up here, but they've never owned a car and they will never own a car. And so there's lots of young folks in our community that would love to live in our community, that they take transit everywhere, they ride their bikes. And so I do worry sometimes that the people who are living these different lifestyles aren't here representing their views. So I just want to make sure that we are giving them a voice here. And the idea of pay parking and street parking, there has been some success in other places when those revenues are returned directly to the community. So the community sees a benefit to that. So if it's increased space for planting or community gardens, if you're reallocating space, but it's the community sees a direct benefit for that, that can be really effective. So as we move into pay parking beyond the parking lots in Deep Cove out there, or wherever they are, I think that revenue coming back to the community would be really helpful to help ease the transition. And I am, of course, already planning on all of the parking spaces to be vertical gardens because we're not going to need them with all the changes that are happening, but I agree it's going to happen over time. We're not quite there yet. But I also just wanted to say that from our perspective, you hear a lot of talk about how from developer, it seems to be that it's like the municipalities' parking restrictions are preventing these innovative projects, but time and time again, we go to the developers and we say, we're willing to go there in town centers, in places that have it, and they say there isn't a market for that yet. So we still are in that stage where I don't think it's on us. I think we have been willing to reduce parking quite significantly, and staff has been really supportive of that in certain locations, but we're just not there yet. So we've got a lot of work to do. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Councillor Curran. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you very much, Your Worship. Just returning to this issue of resident parking only, time limited and pay parking, the enforced parking structures, and just for the benefit of those listening and the community, can you talk a little bit about the enforcement strategy? I mean, will there be warnings? Will there be tickets? I mean, and how will we be resourcing the enforcement of these strategies?
I need someone to put a hand up here. I've got Mr. Ono. There you go.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. So right now, Your Worship, I guess I'll start with the easy one through you to Councillor Hanson, is right now we don't have any on-street pay parking, but we do have on-street resident parking only, and we do have some limited parking zones with resident exemption. And so the structure and the enforcement would be the same as what we do now, where well, first, I guess maybe I'll dial back a little bit, is we usually, for those areas, we usually implement them as a result of a request from a neighborhood. That's the typical way that they go in, is because they're getting overrun by people parking on their streets, and they complain that they can't get parking on their own streets. So usually what the process would be that we would do some kind of a survey to see how high the demand truly is, and if it's truly a parking issue, then we'll try to garner how much support there is on the street for that new regulation to go in, so some form of parking regulation. And then once it goes in, then the residents are usually fully informed that it's going in. It's usually gone in based on their request. And so we would move right to enforcement then. Now, then the question comes, well, how much enforcement staff do you have? And during some certain peak periods of the year, as council knows, and in certain neighborhoods, like around in Deep Cove or out around Lynn Canyon Park, we could almost throw a continuous supply of bylaw enforcement officers at it, and we won't ever catch everybody. Whereas other times of the year in other neighborhoods, it's not such a big problem. So depending on how much demand there is, depending on which neighborhoods, we would just keep on adjusting the resources and coming back to council if we need additional resources, because the issues have gotten so far out of hand that we just can't keep up, Your Worship. So that's kind of the whole philosophy, is we try to tailor the resources to suit the demands.
Thank you.
Okay, so from my own comments on the matter, I think that we need to be putting covenants on these properties, and we need to be communicating with people that this is intended to be a low parking area, that we're going to be managing the parking in and out of the space. I've seen news reports recently of other municipalities where after the fact, people became aware that that the parking was going to be removed in a community, and there was a huge outrage and upset in the community.
Can't hear you very well, Mike.
Because the parking was reduced after the fact. And so I think we have to get on this. We have to start warning people that are moving into these developments and into these town center spaces that it is planned to be a low parking zone, and that if they're thinking about renting in the place, if they're thinking about moving into the place, they need to be aware that parking will be rare in that area, because some people have jobs that require them to use their own vehicle, and it may not be a good fit. But if we don't make them aware of that on the front end, it can become a very costly change for somebody to move out of the space and move to somewhere that that can accommodate their needs. And legitimately, people do have a great variety of needs. I appreciate Councillor Kern's comments about persons with disabilities requiring that kind of support in some cases. But there are a lot of businesses and a lot of jobs in the community that cannot be conducted on transit, and need to be able to take advantage of a vehicle, whether it's a company vehicle or their own vehicle. They need to be able to use it for their work. I did want to talk about transit as a viable alternative. I sit on TransLink's Mayor's Council. I know the demands and needs being pushed upon TransLink over the next 15 years. And I got to tell you, it's very hard to get attention for municipal issues on the North Shore right now. We have been able to get some attention for our bridge infrastructure. And we have 2 studies that are being conducted to deal with that aspect of it. But transit as an alternative throughout the bulk of the District of North Vancouver is decades away. It is not, we're just not quite there yet. It is decades away. And so, yes, I'm committed to transit-oriented development in our town centers. Yes, I am committed to improving transit options through our community, but I'm also realistic about how many hours of service are going to be brought forward to our community and where we have to put them. I have to tell you that our first priority over the next little while is to ascribe priority hours to places that are delivering workers to the North Shore. So spaces like West First and Welch and those areas that have C-SPAN, Fiberco, all of those businesses, right now they have extremely limited bus service in those areas. And I gotta tell you, that is a better bang for a buck investing in the transit services in those areas than it is by extending it out to residential areas in our community. And so while we obviously do need to do that, we obviously do need to do it over time, the pecking order of priorities suggests that a place where there's 5,000 workers is going to be a higher priority than a community that's of medium or lower density in the community. And so I don't see a significant number of hours going to residential beyond the campaigns that we're pushing for the rapid bus Route 9 and Route 14, different proposed rapid buses on the North Shore. So I do think that the covenant warnings is something that we have to be taking a proactive step on and warning people about our plans for low parking in the area, because I think otherwise we're going to be creating problems for ourselves down the road, problems that will be very costly for people to solve. And we have to be cognizant of that. On the parking options, I do think that time limited with a resident only portion in the evening is or resident-only parking exemption as well is something that is provides a great deal of flexibility to a lot of areas in our community. I'm glad that we're adding that to the toolbox, but you know, I still see lots of situations. So just as an example, we had a big wind blowdown about 3 days ago. And so you can go through the neighborhood right now and take a look and see which cars haven't actually been moved in the last 72 hours. And in some places, it's pretty dramatic. You go along the Parkway in about I think it'd be about the 2500 block by just before Berkeley, and you can see which cars have never moved in the last 72 hours because of the amount of debris that's parked on them. And it's not an insignificant amount. It may be 10% or 20% of the cars that are just being long-term parked on district property. And I think we have to more actively police that, because as you say, it is a limited quantity. It is a very large cost to the municipality to have that space available. And if somebody is just using it to store a car rather than using it more actively, then I don't know that it's the best investment for us. So I would like to talk about some of those issues in the long run as well. But those are my comments. I don't see any other members of council putting their hand up to speak, although we've been fairly exhaustive on this one. So at this point, the matter has been moved and seconded. I will call the question. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Contrary minded, say nay. Hearing none, Mr. Clerk, I'm going to rule that that is unanimous support by the council for this matter.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, council, mindful of the time, we're at 8:40 and we're 2 minutes in, or 2 items in, and we have some meaty items still to go. And so we're going to move on to item 8.3 right away. But if you need to get up and stretch your legs for a minute, don't worry about it. Go and do it. As my friend, the mayor of the city of North Van, a community health nurse would say, that sitting is the new smoking. And so feel free to stretch your legs and return to the meeting as soon as you reasonably can. We're going to keep things going. So keep your audio on so you can hear the presentation. But I intend to stretch my legs for a minute. At this point, we have item 3.3. I haven't seen Mr. Bridger come on, so I guess I'm going to, oh, there's Mr. Bridger. Okay. Mr. Milburn, do you want to open up the item?
Oh, Your Worship, but just to note that this item is returning to council from a recent workshop. And Mr. Bridger, I understand, has a very brief introductory words. And I'm not sure also if Mr. Ono would like to comment as well, Your Worship.
Thank you. Mr. Bridger, go ahead. Mr. Ono is passing to you. There you go.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes. Good evening, Your Worship and members of council. The North Shore Sea Level Rise Risk Assessment and Adaptive Management Strategy is a multi-partner project funded by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, and it's aimed at understanding our community's vulnerability to coastal flooding now and into the future. Staff have engaged with the public during the project, and the feedback is reflected in the strategy, and will continue engagement during implementation of the plan. The strategy includes a range of potential concepts and resources to develop adaptation policies and plans, and staff are recommending that the strategy be approved to initiate further work on implementation of the 6 key actions over the next 10 years to continue the adaptation work. That's all I have, Your Worship.
Okay. Members of council looking for, are there any questions about the matter? I know we've spoken about this issue before. Councillor Miri?
I just have some questions, and I'm not sure, is Mr. Joyce in the room or no? Is Mr. Joyce, oh, Mr. Ono's here for Mr. Joyce?
I am indeed, Your Worship. Through
Okay,
you.
we did have a bit of a conversation about this. Can I just ask some questions first, Mayor Little?
That'd be great. I'll come to you for a motion right after your comments, if that's possible.
Okay, just need some additional comments. We had several emails that were sent from our local stream keepers, our fishy friends, many of which are professional engineers, and they were part actually of the input and the discussion in regards to the report that was produced. And they did bring up a number of scenarios in regards to the intertidal areas and the net loss with 1 meter of sea level rise and 2 meters of sea level rise, and the concerns about losing that intertidal area, what that means for the return of salmon, what that means for the environment, and all the work that they've been so diligently working on. I mean, they were the ones that, when I brought up the issue of tertiary at Metro Vancouver board, they were the ones that, came forward and brought all the pertinent information in regards to those arguments to go to tertiary. They're very skilled. They're some of the most respected engineers, and certainly biologists. Ken Ashley is on that group, and Don Mavinik, Glenn Parker, all very well known, and they do know what they're talking about. So, this concern of theirs, I have yet to have a response. I did share it with Mr. Joyce. He did reach out to, or attempted to reach out to Mr. Parker. I know Councillor Kern and I sort of had an email exchange with Mr. Joyce as well. And unfortunately, there was really not I guess a comment in regards to that conversation for this motion. So maybe Mr. Ono, do you have any information in regards to those conversations, or?
Yes, Your Worship, through you, if I may.
Please.
So, Your Worship, by the sea level rise report and strategy right now isn't actually asking council to make any firm decisions on policy. What the sea level rise strategy actually presents is our best and our consultants' best estimate of what might transpire over the next 80 to 180 year time horizon. So from 2100 through out as far as 2100 to 2200. There's a lot of assumptions. Things will change over time, and there's a few scenarios and a few high-level policy options that are framed in the discussion document. So in the sea level rise strategy. One of the top 4 actually concerns or impact areas identified in the background report is the intertidal habitat, which is, I think, the area that Mr. Marshall and Mr. Mavnik and so on that they're concerned about. And so what you have in the discussion report is a technical analysis that actually brings to light concerns like the squeeze of the intertidal area that they're concerned about and how that might be impacted. And the good news here, Your Worship, I believe anyways, is that we actually have this information in front of us now. So we know what to look for, and we have a fairly long time horizon for this council and for future councils now to start refining and focusing in on those areas that are going to be really critical as council develops policy responses and possibly engineering responses, but definitely policy responses over time to deal with these things. And so what you have in this report before you is 6 action areas, including more consultation, more outreach to the community, more information to be provided to the community, including all of those people that, like the stream keepers, to try to formulate the responses. And there will be more technical work done if council approves this approach. So this really is going to be council's approval for staff to get on and do more work in this area in order to come up with those answers and develop solutions that hopefully will balance the multiple issues that are going to happen. It's everything from impacts to transportation infrastructure, as well as the intertidal habitat, as well as wastewater infrastructure, as well as impacts on buildings and properties and businesses. So there's a lot to balance here, but at least we have some information now. And it may not be 1 meter, it may not be 2 meters, it may be more, it may be less, but this is based on the best science and information we have today that we can start the planning process, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay, my next speaker is Councillor Murray. Sorry, you wrapped up your.
Yeah, I'll move the recommendation. Oh, my dog just walked in. Sadie wants to be part of the discussion. I'll move the recommendation, but I guess, you know, my concern with this is that those issues that stream keepers raised were not identified in the report. And I would say that in this new world of this council where we are so concerned with the environment needs to be placed first. I get that, and I mean, we have to, you know, consider that the majority of the density that the district is considering is on a floodplain. And, you know, that plan, the official community plan, was built on a floodplain. And we have some opportunities right now to pivot in regards to that plan. And so are we going to, you know, walk the talk? Obviously, there's areas in the community that have been built. Obviously, there's areas in the community that have been built for decades. And certainly we need to look at protecting, you know, that existing infrastructure, port infrastructure, commercial infrastructure that is existing. But the discussion needs to be about, do we add more? Do we intensify? Do we develop to the point where we're building infrastructure to protect densities that may have been able to be considered in a different way? If you look at the Maplewood community, you know, with the loss of several light industrial sites over the years because of council decisions in the past, I think there was a concept that a lot of that industrial land might be taken up in the innovation districts. We now know, or we don't know actually, what the future of that land holds, given the addition to reserve with the Tsleil-Waututh Nation and what their plans are. We don't really know what their their concepts are at this moment. We haven't been able to have that discussion. So, you know, and so that heeds to what do we do on the land in that area that is next to Maplewood Mudflats, one of the last remaining areas of its kind. It's a very environmentally sensitive area, and we have to be very careful with how we treat it going forward. And if we're going to be doing a lot of this work in order to protect development that is not there yet, I ask ourselves, you know, why are we looking at developing an area that is going to be the subject of impacting the intertidal zone? Why are we going to be developing an area that's going to be the subject of flooding and insurance cost rise, displacement of residents? It's one thing to displace communities that are built on, like the port, for instance, that is built on infrastructure for trade or commercial, where you're not going to have people in those buildings 24 hours a day, or very reduced levels of people, certainly, you know, in many areas. It's quite another to densify those areas on floodplains and have to deal with the displacement of human beings and the costs of that and what that means. So I think we have a big discussion in this regard, and I want to draw on those people in our community to assist us in making these decisions and listening to them. They are, after all, the shareholders and taxpayers in this municipality, and I want to be able to engage with them fully and listen to their perspectives and points of view. All the work that the stream keepers have been doing is trying to rectify what development has done in the past to our environment and our returns of salmon stock. And there's certainly been impacted greatly over the decades from, you know, the human built form and construction. And they're trying to turn that around. And it would be a shame to have all that work be done in vain.
Thank you very much, Councillor Murray. Mr. Stewart, I see that you're up there. I didn't see if it was you or Councillor Curran that went up first. Did you want to comment?
Your Worship, I just would, I'd like to state that, you know, the science of sea level rise is still in its infancy. The impact on local government is still in its infancy. And really the report that's in front of you is suggesting that we need to start down this path. We need to recognize that it's an issue, whether it's an issue, certainly not 1 year from now, but 20, 50 years from now. And so I think as well as I understand and respect Councillor Murray's comments, that we need to engage everybody as we solve this problem. Staff are really recommending that we recognize that we have an issue, whether it's, you know, however you interpret the 2 meter phenomenon. The fact of the matter is we likely have an issue that we have to deal with. And this really puts a framework in place for council to start to understand that and deal with that. And it will not be dealt with this council or the next council or the next council after that. It will be a 50-year, maybe a 100-year issue. But it's important for us as leaders to recognize the issues that we have in front of us and start to deal with them. And we're not advocating as staff huge radical changes in the way we deal with stuff. What we're suggesting is we need now to be more sensitive, and we need to understand what the long-term implications are of certain kinds of strategies. So I just want to add that comment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. Mr. Clerk, I see you just came up there. Did you have a comment?
Yes, Your Worship. Councillor Murray has moved the motion. We do not have a seconder, so perhaps we could secure that before we continue with debate.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Will someone second the motion? I don't see anyone's hand up.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Seconds the motion. Councillor Curran, you're next up.
Thank you. Thanks for the report, staff. I know it's going to be a long ongoing process, and there are, as Mr. Stewart mentioned, a lot of moving parts in terms of flood mapping at the provincial, federal, and local level that will make everything different, and the insurance industry. So even though they are offering overland flood insurance, that does not apply to places that coincidentally have mapping tied to flood zones, which doesn't exist yet. So it's only starting to emerge. So the insurance industry is sending huge red flags to everyone. And so I think that's something we have to be certainly mindful of. I will say that all of this planning needs, from my view, be centered in like a planetary health framework, understanding that there is no human health without the health of the ecosystems in the planet, and the connectivity of salmon to orcas to saltwater, like everything is connected. And so I think it has to be approached through a planetary health framework, not through protecting personal property framework, because personal property doesn't matter if there's no human health, etc. So it's a bit maybe a shift in ideology, and that's something that I have heard from other members of the community, that they're concerned that the value is always placed on private property instead of the health of the planet upon which we live or die. So I think that that's just an important maybe shift in thinking surrounding that. I would like staff to comment on the work that's being done at the metro level. I understand that there actually is a regional governance body that's working on ecosystem management approach for the region. So the Burrard Inlet and the Fraser River, that's, I think, through liquid waste. I know Mayor Little sits on liquid waste. So could someone talk about that? Because obviously we're going to be very much as part of a whole regional approach to this. And so maybe a comment on that, and then a comment on just definitely prioritizing green versus gray infrastructure. I think that there's ways that we can work with the natural environment instead of against the natural environment, and recognizing the value that the natural environment provides to us, most importantly being human health. So could staff comment on the regional work that's being done and how that will impact what we do, please?
Mr. Ono, can you speak to that?
Yes, Your Worship. I can not
Nice and loud.
specifically. Sorry, Your Worship. Not specifically on ecosystem health. I'm not really sure exactly what initiative that might be, Your Worship. I am aware that Fraser Basin Council is doing a regional sea level rise analysis or study, and there's multiple municipalities involved in that to coordinate some of the science and study analysis being done around sea level rise, and some of the same issues, or many of the same issues are being discussed, especially the tidal squeeze and the squeeze of the foreshore. There has for a long time been several working groups looking at things like the environmental impact of the outfalls as part of the integrated liquid waste and resource management plan. And there is for sure a stormwater interagency liaison group. So there are several groups that are involved at a Metro Vancouver regional level discussing ecological and environmental impacts. There's also a Regional Engineers Advisory Committee Climate Protection Subcommittee that meets regularly to coordinate our municipal efforts on climate action. So I'm not sure specifically which group Councillor Curran may be referring to, but those are the groups and the work that I'm aware of. Worship, thank you.
Mr. Stewart has a comment.
Yeah, I just want to recognize Councillor Curran's comments about there are some mega issues, worldwide issues, continental issues that we have to address. I think it's our job in local government is to understand those and to be agile to them and to recognize them as we do forward planning. And again, I go back to what's in front of council today is not an attempt to do everything, but it's an attempt to do what our part is, which is give us a framework that allows us to start to recognize the impact of some of those issues. So I just encourage council. It may not be as far as some councillors wish. It may be too far as some councillors wish, but I think it strikes a nice middle in terms of what we can do as local government to recognize that this is an issue that we need to deal with. So I just encourage us to approve this approach, and there will be lots of opportunities to fine tune it along the way. Thank you.
Can I just finish?
Councillor Curran, back to you.
Oh, I was looking at Jordan and it's back to you. Yeah, so the piece, I guess what I would like to understand, I know we're not going to understand that today, but the impact of future development on the connection between sea level rise approach. So if there's already residential and mixed use development in most of our areas, so I think it's important for us to understand if that development is residential or commercial in the future, how does that impact what actions we would take for adaptation in the future as well? So that comes back to land use, right? Like a land use planning. And then I will say I appreciated that Tsleil-Waututh and First Nation input was included in the report, but I know at Metro level, that there's a task force, apparently I've been told by someone who sits on the task force that's happening, and it's including work with the First Nations communities as well. So it's a holistic approach, but I think as we move forward, we just need to have the facts surrounding so that we understand the impacts long-term of the decisions we're making today as best we can with the best science available. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Curran. I see no further speakers on the matter. Oh, Councillor Miri.
I was just going to say that the discussion is part of Climate 2050 at Metro Vancouver, I think, and they're looking at land use planning and sea level rise in that document were actually referenced as well in regards to our climate plan. And so I think that's where it precipitates from. It would be the obvious place.
Yeah, and I could speak to the liquid waste side of things. Obviously, the vast majority of our major infrastructure for liquid waste is down near sea level, right? It's just natural. You treat at the bottom of the hill, and so it's left the entirety of their infrastructure very close to sea level rise impact areas, and also the lifetime build out for Metro Vancouver's infrastructure for liquid waste is typically 80 years is sort of the horizon that they look at. And so we have Northwest Langley Wastewater Treatment Plant, the North Shore Wastewater Treatment Plant, the Iona plant all coming up, and all of those pieces are being changed in an environment where in their lifetime, there will be impacts as they're all at sea level rise. And so it has been a major part of our consideration for the construction of all three of those facilities. I can say that much with some confidence. So thank you. I don't see any other speakers at this time. I will call the question on the motion. All those in favor?
Aye.
Contrary minded? Motion carries. Thank you. Again, noting the time, we are a little bit behind on where we probably should be for the evening, but we're pressing along. We have item number 3.4, 2050 to 2070 Marine Drive, the Marvell Developments Council early input. With Council again, we're dealing with an early input opportunity here. There's a fairly well developed plan, I would say, on this space, but the direction that we're looking for is outlined at the top of page 2. And I will, when we get to discussion on the matter, I'm going to go around and get an opportunity for people to give some initial comments, and then we'll try to find something that we can find some support for, hopefully, and ideally a majority of council. At this point, though, we do have a speaker signed up to speak to the item. Speaking in favor, we have Michael Geller. Welcome, Michael Geller. Can you hear me? Oh, caught on the mute button, I'm afraid. Mr. Clerk, can we assist in some way? It still seems to be muted.
Okay, there we are, sir.
There you
Your
go.
Worship, Mayor, members of council, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you tonight in this very unusual situation. Before I start, though, I do want to just acknowledge the hard work of staff and especially Casey Peters, who's really helped guide this application along with a number of other staff over the many years. I'm speaking on behalf of the Marvell Group. They're the owner of this property. I've worked with them now for 6 years, and hopefully I can convince you why, notwithstanding the concerns you've had about other projects, why this one should proceed forward. Okay, now. 6 years ago, I appeared before some of you as I was overseeing the rezoning of the adjacent property known as the Grouse Inn site, today Park West. And I'll always remember that evening because after my presentation, I remember Councillor Murray got up and said, "Mr. Geller, I just want you to know, I've been on this council for 18 years. And I worried about what was coming next." She said, "That was the best applicant presentation I've ever heard, but I will not be speaking or supporting for your project." And her concerns were that there's just too much development happening in this area at one time, too many cars, too many traffic concerns. But it's now 6 years later, and we're seeing these developments progress. It's interesting that 238 of the 258 homes at the Park West project have now sold. And indeed, it took a while, but this is slowly turning into the planned community that you are all hoping for. So for the last few weeks, I've been regularly watching you on council. I've been listening to your concerns, as has my client, about the amount of development that's taking place, the size of the developments, and concerns about whether there's adequate affordable housing and whether the developers are respecting the need for more sustainable development. But it was interesting recently on November 2nd to hear some of the comments that were made. One of the comments that certainly impressed me was how sad it was that a project like the ones you are now seeing with affordable housing, low carbon emissions, that they were not being created when the Lower Capilano development first started. I also think it's worth noting out that Councillor Murray pointed out, isn't it amazing, she said, what we can get when we let the developers know we're wanting affordable housing, reduced greenhouse gases, and reduced parking. And the fact is, I think the developers are listening to you. We certainly are. So what we're bringing forward tonight is a proposal which I think does begin to include a lot more affordable housing than it ever had 6 years ago, not just non-market housing for rent, but also of ownership housing, probably 20% of which will become rental. But two programs we're promoting. One is of local buyers first, and also a rent-to-own program, which could help first-time buyers get into the marketplace. And we're also trying to address parking, a topic that you've been addressing tonight. I'd love to spend more time on this, but for years I've argued that we should rethink whether we need minimum requirements and perhaps we need maximum requirements. At Simon Fraser University, we brought car share up there. EVO does not yet operate in your district, especially in this area. We will bring EVO and car share because, as Councillor Kern and others, Councillor Forbes have pointed out, people do need cars, but they don't need two cars. So we are providing, I think, adequate bicycle parking, but we will provide more. Many people have 2 bikes, some 3 bikes, and charging facilities for electric cars and so forth. So to conclude, I want to try and impress upon you the fact that there's an opportunity here to complete one of your first town centers, to demonstrate that you can change the way people live, that they don't have to get into their car all the time. We have a supermarket next door. We have shops and offices next door. The developer of this project is proposing that anybody who doesn't take a parking space will have first choice at work office space within the development, within a business center. The kind of amenity that I think people now need, recognizing the impact of COVID. So what we're hoping is that you will agree that it's appropriate to let this move forward, that we don't have to wait until you finish the OCP review, which, as you know, has been held up. We give you our commitment that if we can get this moving forward and get to public hearing and rezoning, we will then proceed immediately to the development permit and the building permit and construction, because we want to see this project finished concurrent with all the surrounding developments. I'm apologizing for not taking more time to try and highlight what I think are the many benefits of this development, but it will complete the neighborhood park. It will complete the road system. It will eliminate the driveways that are currently along Marine Drive that interfere with the new B-line service. And I think you will find that we're creating a variety of affordable housing choices. And finally, creating what, as Frank Ducote, the urban designer, pointed out, is in fact the westerly gateway to your district. I hope that I've given you some of the reasons why we want you to allow this to move forward. We know that there'll be changes that you want, but please give us the opportunity to work with staff so that we can fine tune this, refine it, and create a development that we'll all be very proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Geller. Okay, returning back to staff then at this point, I think get a presentation from staff before we carry on with the council discussion. Mr. Hartford, will you be leading that, or Mr. Milburn?
Your worship.
Thanks very much, Your Worship.
I have a brief presentation. I won't take too much time to run through.
Thank you so much.
I'll ask the clerk if I can. Okay, I think we're on share screen. I just want to confirm people can see the presentation.
Yes.
Your worship and members of council, staff are seeking direction from council on next steps for this detailed application for a residential development that includes a mix of non-market rental housing and strata development. The proposal would require council's consideration of a rezoning bylaw, housing agreements, and issuance of one or more development permits. In terms of the site details, the property is located to the west of Capilano Road in the south portion of the Lionsgate Village Center. Curling Road is on the north side of the site. Marine Drive is on the south side of the site. The site is approximately 2.6 acres in size and comprises 4 commercial parcels currently occupied by the 61-room Travelodge Hotel, 2 restaurants, and a parking lot. The OCP designates the site as CRMU2, which envisions development at up to 2.5 FSR. As was noted in the council report, the proposed FSR at 2.75 is slightly higher than 2.5. The proposed 0.25 FSR above the FSR specified in the OCP designation represents the floor area of the proposed non-market rental units. Existing zoning for the site is a mix of tourist commercial zone 4 to reflect the existing hotel use and Marine Drive commercial zone 9 for the remainder of the site. The site would require rezoning to a new CD zone to reflect the proposed density of 2.75. As a bit of a run through on the site layout, the proposal includes 3 buildings with a total of 299 dwelling units. Building 1 is a 29-story building located in the southeast portion of the site with 208 strata units. Building 2 is a 4-story building located in the southwest portion of the site and includes 35 non-market rental units. Building 3 is a 6-story building located in the northwest portion of the site with 56 strata units. A new park is proposed in the northeast portion of the site, and a land dedication from this project would be added to a land dedication previously provided from the Grouse Inn site to the east. Lionsgate Crescent is a new road that would create a connection through the site as shown in orange. The east portion of this new road was dedicated from the Grouse Inn site to the east. The project includes additional road dedications on Curling Road to the north and Marine Drive to the south, shown in orange, as well as a number of pedestrian connections that will allow public access between Marine Drive, the new Lionsgate Crescent, and Curling Road. There are 2 underground parking garages, and the entrances to those separate garages are shown with the red arrows. In terms of the housing mix, as I mentioned, the project includes 35 non-market rental units and 264 strata units in a mix of unit types ranging from 1 to 3 bedroom layouts. 66% of the units are in a 2 or 3 bedroom layout considered suitable for families. And as noted in the applicant's presentation, following the completion of the staff report in tonight's agenda, the applicant advised that they were proposing to amend the project to designate 10% or 29 of the strata units to a first-time buyers program as rent to own, as well as a locals first purchase program. With regard to the non-market rental units, rents for the proposed 35 units are targeted to be from 8% to 15% below the Metro Vancouver median rents as shown in yellow, with the rent depending on the unit type. The proposed rents are also shown in orange relative to the District of North Vancouver median rents for all existing apartments, with a discount range from 15 to 26%. The non-market units would be considered affordable for households with incomes of between $46,000 for a 1-bedroom unit and $66,000 for a 3-bedroom unit. Parking for the project is proposed to include 319 parking spaces for residential purposes for a ratio of just over 1 parking stall for each of the 299 dwelling units. 30 spaces are proposed for visitors in all 3 buildings. The applicant team has also advised that they anticipate examining their parking proposed as well as providing parking for car share vehicles. Bicycle parking proposed includes 449 spaces for residential use for a ratio of 1.5 bike spaces per unit, with additional bikes parking for visitors at the building entrances. That concludes my run through on the detailed application. And as you've already heard from Mr. Geller, he's available to represent questions for the applicant team, and obviously staff can answer questions directed to staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Hartford. So council, I think what we're after here is, again, your initial thoughts. This is an early input opportunity. So I'm going to go around the horn in the order that I see you listed on my screen, and give you an opportunity for a couple of minutes to sort of maybe ask some questions, tell your initial concerns, and also whether you would support, proceed, revise, reject, defer, or refer, one of the options on there. Just for my, I think the first person on my list, the first person up here is Councillor Murray, followed by Councillor Curran. Councillor Murray.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Well, Mr. Geller, that was not your best presentation, but it wasn't bad. But you probably won't be surprised that I won't be supporting this one either. There you go. We have a long relationship, Mr. Geller and I, and we have some very good conversations. And I think you bring up a very good point, Mr. Geller, and thank you for stating it to council and the community that, you know, when we have a council that is very eager to support redevelopment in the community. And, you know, I always say this, that I raised my hand in favor of that OCP because all the development was going up onto that mountainside of ours. And I didn't think that was a very good idea to cut down a bunch of trees and build a subdivision of more housing that we couldn't support responsibly. So I did put my hand up in favor of that OCP. The problem that I had with it from the very beginning was the rampant approval of development after development after development, the displacement of members of our community because market development was so lucrative. And there was this need on council that we approve everything and it'll fix all our problems. Prices haven't, you know, they've never been higher. We're sitting in more traffic than we've ever sat in. It takes an hour to go from Seymour to Lonsdale. You know, I don't really know what it did. And, you know, in decades to come, we will look back like every area of redevelopment that municipalities and cities go through, and we will reflect on it. There will be positives and there will be negatives, action to, or reaction to every action. So my problem with it was that there was no phasing of any of it. It was just like gung-ho, approve everything, build as fast as we can, and to hell with the impact to the community. And I struggled and tried to argue that we should just phase it out over the municipality, do one in Lower Lynn, one in Lynn Valley, one in Lower Capilano. But that was never something that the majority of council at the time wanted to consider. And I was getting letters, like it was like dozens of letters weekly, which for a council is a lot. And people, it was every conversation, every party you went to, every park, every standing around waiting for picking up your kids. It was like, Lisa, the construction, it doesn't stop. The cars, the traffic, we can't move anymore. It's horrible. You know, do something. And I just, what I've always done for 24 years, it was 18 when we met Mr. Geller on the Grouse Inn, it's now 24. And, you know, I just continue to stand up to protect the livability of the community. It could have been much different. We didn't have to be divisive. It doesn't have to be divisive now. You know, I will take your comments in regards to my comments all those years ago. I don't often get people representing the development community saying anything nice about me. I'm enemy number one, and we're gonna take you down, Mary. And what's happened over 24 years, Mr. Geller, is that the skin is thick, probably a little drier, but it's thick. So take your best shot. I send that out to the community. There has been an enormous amount of development down in Lower Capilano, like there was an enormous amount of development up in Edgemont, and people need a break. One of our biggest challenges in regards to this application, Mr. Geller, is the fact that we have a piece of property next door, as you are well aware, the old Earls site that is in the district of West Vancouver. Don't ask me why these boundaries all those years ago were cut the way they were cut, but they were. And we have some significant challenges with the construction traffic that is going to access that site, which has already been approved by the District of West Vancouver. So we are going to endeavor to work with them. And unfortunately, this project is going to have to take a back seat for now, in my opinion. Because we've got a lot of projects on the go. We continue to have that. But I think that when you have a council that's not willing to rubber stamp everything and approve everything at lightning speed, then you start to get projects that actually include the important things in the community, like some below market housing, like surface. I think you can do better on this one. I think you need to go back to your client and work your magic, because I think you have a history of looking at the kind of diversity in housing that the region needs. And you and I have had some very good conversations about that over the years. But I think there's some examples that we've seen recently, although I didn't support them either. But they are looking at below market. They are looking at the kind of housing that we really do need for people that are struggling right now to stay here, not ones that are coming here, but actually just to stay here. And that's quite I'm going to end my comments right now. That's quite you know, that's quite different from previous development applications where it was all luxury market and worry about the bottom line instead of people. So those are my comments. Thank you, and nice to see you.
Okay, next I have Councillor Curran, followed by Councillor Hanson. Councillor Curran.
Mayor Little, I'm happy to go, but I'd also curious because I believe that you and Councillor Hanson may have been on council previously, and it would just be helpful to hear this perspective, your perspective, because I think as Mr. Geller, or maybe the public doesn't understand, as much as you've been working on this for 7 years, we only got it like a week ago. And so I've been trying to catch up with staff about some context for the hotel and like what was envisioned in that space. And so if that's okay with you, I'm sure it won't change what I think, but I'm just curious. Thank you.
I'll come back to you. That is fine. Councillor Hanson, followed by Councillor Forbes. Councillor Hanson, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. Perhaps Councillor Kern will change what she thinks when she hears what I have to say. Who knows? I'm much of the same mind as Councillor Murray, and I will be supporting the reject option. In saying that, I'm not in any way criticizing the proponent nor the proposal, nor, of course, Mr. Geller, who so eloquently brought forward the arguments in support of the proposal. Instead, it's a question of timing. It's a question of phasing. It's a question of, is this a proposal that should be brought forward at this time? I would like to draw all of our minds back to the 2018 election. The issue in the 2018 election was the pace of development. How much construction and development would there be in proportion to the amount of infrastructure that we felt we were behind on infrastructure? And the public, in my view, voiced very clearly that they wanted development to slow down and allow infrastructure to catch up. Certainly that was the position that I ran on, and certainly that's the voice that I must give to the voters who elected me. I said in that election campaign that I would focus on social, affordable, and rental housing, and indeed I have voted in any case where social and affordable and rental has been the development. At its core, this is just another large market strata development. 299 units, 599 parking stalls. No. Although there is allowance for non-market rental, that's barely more than 10% of the proposal. For me to vote in favor of a market development, 29 stories, 299 units with 599 parking stalls would not be consistent with the election campaign that I ran, the promises that I made to the electorate, nor from what was, from my point of view, the clear will of the electorate when they cast their votes. The area, as Councillor Murray has noted, already has a great deal of construction in the vicinity. There is fatigue around all of this building. And I, for one, will not be supporting these types of projects. I instead will stand firm to my commitments, and I will ask council to prioritize social, affordable, and rental, and most importantly, also importantly, to prioritize any and all initiatives that allow infrastructure to catch up to the pace of development of the North Shore. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. I will just point out that the zoning bylaw recommends 599 parking stalls, but the proposal is for significantly less in total. I think it's 357. Is that correct, Mr. Geller?
Yes, including the visitors.
Okay. So, but other than that, your comments stand, Councillor. Thank you. I've got Councillor Forbes followed by Councillor Bond. Councillor Forbes?
I can go anyway. Sorry, I just meant that you were on council and then I left out Councillor Bond and then it got all awkward. Like I just wanted to hear from people who had previous experience with this, but anyway. So
I'll still be sharing. I'm 3 more people down the list. So why don't we go to Councillor Forbes and we'll get back to you. There you go, Councillor Forbes.
I'll be short and sweet because Councillor Hanson has said pretty much what I'd say. I also ran on those same things that Councillor Hanson said, and I've also heard from residents down in that area as well that have reached out to me and told me that they are screaming that they need a break, just like Edgemont did to us, to ask that of us as well. So there are some things that were nice to see, but not enough of. And as Councillor Hanson said, it basically becomes another market, very tall building. And it's like 11% that's non-market rent. So I will reject it as well.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Councillor Bond?
Thanks, Mayor Little. I'll have my initial comments. And, you know, whenever we have these discussions about adding new homes to neighborhoods and the pace of development, you know, I think I always think back to other areas of Metro Vancouver who have had these discussions in the past. And the one that comes to mind right now is the West End. And in the 1950s and the 1960s, when the West End was being proposed and developed, all of the same concerns about rampant development and destroying the neighborhood and what are we going to do when all these people move here were all of the concerns. And now, 50 years, 60 years later, the West End is one of the most livable, most well-loved neighborhoods in all of Metro Vancouver, where people walk to their local services, they take transit, there's a huge mix of incomes and people in that neighborhood. And so I think we, again, similar to the proposal that we had last week, we do need to think long term here. And I think that in this proposal, there are a lot of good things. This area in particular is probably the closest place in the District of North Vancouver that you can get to the job center where most of our people go is in Vancouver. It's basically a 10-minute bus ride from downtown. People could ride their bike or their electric bike there in the same amount of time in 10 minutes. And so there is a lot of positive things for having new homes in this vicinity. We've talked about previously that, especially on the social and the affordable housing front, where the district can make the most impact is on our own land. And I think the most we can probably expect from private development to contribute to those is somewhere around 10%. And this proposal has around 10%. The rents are very low, very below market, similar to the one that we heard last week. This means that a single parent working as a teacher can afford a 3-bedroom brand new apartment to rent. And we need that for our community. We need that in this area, and so I think that's a good part of the proposal. The other comments I have, Mayor Little, maybe I'll leave them until we get a more specific motion, but I do have more comments on the specifics of the development, but just wanted to put those out there first. And I was also elected in the last election, surprising or not, and I only received 1.5% less of the votes of the general vote than Councillor Hanson did, and I did not run on those sentiments that were expressed by him in council. So, speaking on behalf of those at least percentage of people that voted for me to be on this council, do not share those same views, and I don't think it's inaccurate to say that an overwhelming percentage of people in the district are represented by those views.
I'm sure we all have different constituencies as well. Thank you, Councillor Bond. I've got Councillor Back next. Sorry, Councillor Bond, I'm putting you in proceed rather than revise. Proceed, is that correct?
Do you want to have the specific motions right now, or are we going to kind of do the?
I'm going to go to someone in the prevailing group to form a motion, and so I just need to know.
Yeah, I think I have some specific things that I'd like to see addressed if this moves forward, but I don't think it's major overhauls to the proposal.
Thank you. Councillor Back.
Thank you, Your Worship, and thank you, Mr. Geller, for the presentation. I probably won't be falling in the prevailing group here tonight, but that's probably not a surprise either. I was also elected to this council, and I certainly didn't run on the platform that we were going to slow down the building of new homes, and in particularly, a diversity of housing that's needed in the district. And this particular project, I think the best thing it's got going for it among all of the different features that have been presented really is the location. It's a pretty key part of the Lionsgate town center. And when you look at where it's located and the park that's included, that's a really important amenity to the people that are living down in this town center. Well, I think there is some height to this tower, there's no question, but if you look at the neighboring properties, it actually, in my first look at it over the last little while, it fits in quite well. I don't think this is just another market strata development. There are 35 non-market homes in here that the people that are lucky enough to get those will be very appreciative of. And I note, as Councillor Bond did, that the non-market rents are quite a significant discount from our district median rents. as Councillor Bond also noted, I mean, the proximity to jobs on the North Shore is great. Transit as well is right there. You know, I think there's no reason that this shouldn't proceed in some fashion. I definitely have some questions as we, you know, if we were able to get the opportunity to look at fine tuning it. But yeah, I think we all need to think about, you know, the future of our community and where kids and grandkids are going to live. And this takes time. And this applicant has been involved in the process for 7 years. I think they deserve an opportunity to for us to look at this and give them the opportunity to move forward. So I'll be in the proceed camp again tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Just for my own comments, thank you, Mr. Geller, for your presentation. It's been great working with you over the years. I do have some concerns about the project that I need to put on the floor right away. I mean, 29 stories is a bit much for me in this space. I have a concern. I take Frank's comments to heart, you know, that the elegant tower, in his view, is the most attractive form. And the problem is that's not what this is. This is the elegant tower with a podium. And so what you end up with is sort of the negative of the podium. What it does is it makes it so that the street level human scale view of the property as you go around it is that it's quite tall because you're staring at a 50-foot facade at the street level, and rather than a tall and narrow slender tower where you have a dramatic amount of public space around there, or some opportunity for light and sunshine, and rather than this dreary concrete space that we have there. And to that end, I've toured the new plaza that's nearby this site, and I got to tell you, it ain't what was promised, in the sense that it doesn't have, it's unlikely to have the kind of vibrancy that was in every single proposal that came forward in those early days. The 3 CRUs that are on the south side of the property were intended to be coffee shops and add vibrancy and all of these other kinds of things, and instead they've been rated for a very expensive private daycare service through SIFA and making it so that it's unlikely we're going to get the vibrancy. We're going to put a library kiosk there. We're going to put a gymnasium space, and then we have this dreary plaza that I'm very concerned that it's not actually going to be what was originally promised. I have some very serious concerns about the impacts on Curling Road, with West Vancouver proposing a 5-story increase to the project that's next to it. In the presentation, Mr. Geller referred to this being the final piece, and I wish it were the final piece. The problem is we have charred developments 1 block to the east. They've proposed for theirs. We have the Squamish Nation has proposals directly across the street to the south. We have to deal with challenges with Woodcroft about 2 blocks to the north. And it's not the final piece. It will never be the final piece. These projects are a point in time, and then all of these other projects are still going to be taking place and expanding the scope and the space for the town center project. So I have some concerns about this. This project is a lot going for it. The R2 being out front, having that rapid access to transit through and from the area. I think Councillor Bond mentioned the location and proximity to downtown and the employment opportunities that are there. There's no question there's advantages like that, but the uplift of 10% on the property, you know, we should be able to get 10% in benefits out of a normal, standard, modest project. This is the 3rd tallest building in the district of North Vancouver, and 10%, I'm sorry, is not enough. And we're paying for it. We're adding 0.25 FSR in order to be able to get that benefit back. And so it's not even coming out of the portion that the OCP planned on. And this is one of our ongoing frustrations with the OCP. When we designed the OCP, when we did the research, when we came forward with it, the plan was that the FSR levels that are set in the OCP are going to be able to deliver all of these things. They're going to deliver housing for persons with disabilities and seniors, and they're going to have a variety of rental options. And then project after project after project that comes forward demands an OCP increase to give any benefit back to the public. And it's very frustrating. I think your project has a lot going for it. I don't think the timing is right. And I have serious concerns about the height and also the contribution back to the community in terms of affordability, accessibility, and some of those other different options facing our community. So I will probably be supporting the reject group tonight, even though I usually like to preserve my ability to revise and fight for more. At this point, I think that the timing is not right, and we should be sending staff to go back and see how great this project could be in the long run. So that's where I fall. Councillor Curran.
Thanks. So the hi, Mr. Geller, nice to meet you. A few comments. The westerly gateway of the North Shore. My dream would be and if it was 29 stories and it was passive social housing, that would be the gateway to the community, because we would have been like, we've done it. We've built this housing. I recognize that that is highly unlikely, unless if I'm wrong, correct me, because that's what I'd like to see. That's probably not going to happen. So having said that, the need in the community for housing that aligns with local incomes, and we still have a lot of work to do to understand that. But I think along Marine Drive, I mean, how wonderful to be able to live and work in the same community, and that's what we're striving to do. But we have this major income gap. But I do appreciate Councillor Bond's comments that it's close to Vancouver. So for people who we just had a childcare report come out that said 75% of our workforce commutes. They leave the North Shore to go to work. So we have a large percentage leaving and then a large percentage coming in for likely to be lower income jobs. So I would like to see more. As much as we can, the priority has to be on social housing. I will say that is IBI, the architect, is that affiliated with IBI group, the larger IBI group? Yeah, so I look at IBI architecture and the group that they've done, and they've done some locally in Metro in Canada, some amazing passive buildings. Why don't we get those buildings? Yes. Like, I want the innovation, because it's not just about fuel switching, it's about efficiency. And these buildings can literally operate with requiring very little renewable energy. So for a market development, for example, to me, that's leadership. And so I don't know why we don't get those. We'll probably get a chance to talk about it at some point. But I think there's opportunities. One thing I've learned, and there's not a lot of room in this space for learning, I find, in politics, because it's like I thought that things could happen that I'm now learning. You have to take sometimes things that are not ideal to get to something that you do want to see. For example, the park. I think the park is a huge benefit to the community. And I think that we're a car addicted society. It is completely counterintuitive to think that you need parking to get transportation, but that's the way, you have to build the density in these areas to get the transportation. So I do recognize that challenge. I'm usually the outlier that's like, not with anyone, just over here, but I would love to see the benefit to the community has to be in the social housing piece. Like, that's what we are being called on to do. And so I'd love to see, because right now it's presented, there's a 6-story apartment market, a 29-story market, and then a 4-story rental building. And I think that it's just not enough. It's not enough social housing on that space. And you also commented that I criticized density, which that's not it. It's isolation. It's social towers specifically. And it's really about, obviously, location of where they are, but it's the social isolation. So I think the architecture that people are talking about now, creating more common spaces, because people in towers, there's been social science that shows that people do feel more isolated. And that's not what we want to do. So I think there's things about this that are good. I'd love to see if IBI is involved, if you're involved, what your thoughts are on improving the efficiency of the building and seeing how we can maximize the social housing piece. And the other piece, I guess, is the commercial space in that area. I think absolutely you need to have those places that people can go and be part of the community, and having, so I'd love to hear from staff a bit more about the commercial spaces, because I think without a vibrant market and coffee shop and places for people to go and meet their neighbors, a community garden to grow kale, like we need to connect people. And so I haven't walked the area, Mayor Little, as you have, which I will do. But I think that's really important. We're trying to create healthy places, vibrant places where people do have the option to live without a car. So I do think there's things about it that you can't just look at it, you have to look at it as a system. I definitely thought we needed to take a pause to make sure we're not demo evicting people, which this doesn't do, to make sure that we're trying to make good long-term decisions, and to make sure that we're looking at the environmental piece, because these buildings are going to be around for a long time, and there's ways we can do it better. I just don't know why we're not on the edge of that, but I'd love to hear if that's possible. So those are some of my thoughts.
Your Worship, is it possible for me to very briefly respond to Councillor Curran?
On the IBI passive aspect, yes. I think that's a fair question to ask. So go ahead, Mr. Geller.
As I mentioned, we started the new community at Simon Fraser University, and we took a lot of incremental steps, and eventually we've created what many regard as one of the most sustainable communities in Canada. And one of the reasons my client brought me onto this project after a bit of a hiatus was to try and see how we could make it move forward. One of his ideas, as I mentioned, was, why don't we say, if somebody doesn't want to take a parking space, we will create office space for them, because recognizing people are working from home. What I would ask is that if you could allow us to go back and work with staff, recognizing the comments that the mayor has made and others about you're looking for more, I would like to think that we could come back with something that would in fact address many of your comments and create an even more environmentally responsible building. We have, if you see our submission, committed to no fossil fuels at all throughout the development. We are looking at exceptional number of electric car charging stations. The mayor may remember I was driving an electric car back in 2014 and was advocating more electric cars. Car share, many of these ideas that you've been talking about are precisely the sort of things we would like to demonstrate. I realize that you want more, but my fear is if you just reject it and we can't, keep working together, it'll be very difficult. I will give you a commitment on behalf of the client that we will raise the bar on the sustainability for this building. And we will also take a look at what are some of the other things we can do. If the height is a concern, we're more than willing to take a look at adjusting that rather than see all of this work for naught. The fact is, this village center will not work with respect unless the road can go through. The road runs through this site. The park is primarily on our site. So if you will allow us to work with you and the staff, I promise you that what will come back will be different than what you've seen. I appreciate the support for those who say proceed, but we will make the changes that you're looking for.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah, I think that the height needs to be in the social housing, which is the least height right now. And then just the idea of, I know when I read through the plans originally, it was really that even a diversity within buildings. So we don't have these market condos that are, higher end, and then these, I really like the inclusivity of buildings, so that, and shared amenities for everyone. And so seeing opportunities to put, some social housing units. I know there's lots of needs in our community. So to put social housing units within the market pieces more integrated, I think is really important. So I appreciate that. I would support it. I would support it coming back with some changes because I recognize it's part of a system. So but I think I might be on my own there. I don't know.
Hopefully not. My first project was the South Shore of Falls Creek, 1/3 low income, 1/3 middle income, 1/3 high. I got the job at the age of 27 because everyone else at CMHC was convinced it would be a failure. And we now know that mixed income housing can be very successful.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Geller. So we've had a good go around, check the list of people, and as is usual with these kinds of things, is that there isn't one specific thing that council is supporting. I think I'd like to test a revised motion on this one first. So I will be moving that we, in accordance with page 2, that council is not supportive of the rezoning application proposed and requests that the applicant revise their proposal. Is there a seconder for that motion? I've got Councilor Bond seconding it. So that's now on the floor. It's obviously been 7 years in the process, and I do hold out hope that we can find a reasonable compromise in this, but I still have a great deal of concern over the timing of the development. It's just gnawing at me that we should push this a little further down the road with the West Vancouver considerations, with the completion of the other projects in the area. But I do recognize that the park and the road are a significant portion of completing this portion of the area. So I will be at this point supporting a revise, but I have I've outlined the other areas that I think need to be addressed, and I take you at your word that you'll work as hard as you can to try to, but at the end of the day, we may not still be able to come to an agreement on the project, but I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
I believe Councillor Bond, you were the seconder on the motion.
Yeah, I'll add some specific comments, and just following up on yours, Mayor Little. I'm not concerned about the timing of this. I think that right now there's a large construction site with the the Park West project right beside this. West Vancouver looks like they're going to be proceeding with either the existing application or a revised application. And when I think about the impacts to people, there are relatively in the immediate adjacent area few existing residents, and so the impacts of construction of this project, should it proceed, are going to be on the people that are living in those new buildings that are being constructed right now. So if there is an opportunity to build this concurrently with as little overlap or with as much overlap with those other projects as possible, I think that the impacts on those who are moving into the Larco project now that it's received occupancy, that will be moving into the Park West project, that'll be moving into the West Vancouver project, that are moving into all the townhomes in the area, will be reduced overall for the most people. So I think that's one comment. Like other members of council, I'm very supportive of us asking for more from the applicants, especially on social housing. I think the challenge, and it's kind of a practical one, is we're already asking. We are in this application. We're asking for a huge land dedication for a park as well, and so I think the calculation there comes into play of how much land we're asking for park and road and housing. So there's obviously a financial viability challenge there for the applicant. I'd like to echo Councillor Curran's comments around innovative design, and I think your client and the others that now are seeing that council is moving towards fossil fuel free, which I think is, as Councillor Curran mentioned, is what we need to do. I'm also supportive of innovative design, and specifically looking at those kind of social determinants in these buildings. There's a lot of work that's been done, even locally. Firms like Happy City, who have looked at the social integrity in building form, and there are some emerging guidelines about how we can build social interaction back into a lot of our housing forms. And that's not just an issue in traditional towers. It's issues in other forms of development, suburban neighborhoods and everything. So I think those social things are really important. I am supportive of the number of parking stalls. I think one parking stall, again, we're talking about parking today. It's quite aggressive, and I would also support if the applicant is looking at options, and I'm always supportive of options. Someone doesn't want to move in here with a car and doesn't want to buy a stall, that they don't have to, and that the price of their home and the price of the parking stall are separate, so that gives people a choice and a clear incentive to say, well, maybe in this neighborhood I'm not going to need one car or two cars. I can use the car share, I can use the public transit, and I'm going to see that savings on the price that I pay for a home. And so I think that's really important. Let me see if I had more specific comments, but I think those are the ones that I have now. If I have anything else specific, I'll send it through to our staff so that hopefully if this motion is supported, that they'll be working with you more directly to address the concerns of council.
Councillor Bond. Councillor Hanson.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Your Worship. I won't be supporting the revise. Your comments, I think, are absolutely right. The timing of this is not right. This should wait until another phase of our community's evolution. Too much construction in the area, too much construction in the immediately contiguous areas. And I simply don't believe that there's public will for this level and magnitude of development at this site at this time.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no further speakers on the matter at this time. Councillor Back.
Just a brief comment to say that I hear some of the concerns that Councillor Curran has raised and around having mixed types of affordability within one of the buildings. I think is worth looking at. So I would support that in terms of revision, and yeah, overall I think I do support the revised option.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Murray.
Thank you. I won't be obviously supporting the revision. This is a very lucrative neighborhood community postal code. The land, the future of this land will obviously be considered at some point. This is about the icing on the cake in regards to the bottom line, as the views that are seen from these towers, and that's why they're so high, the number of penthouses and sub penthouses that I'm sure are part of all of these projects. Park West next door is your luxury resort. That's how it's marketed. Your luxury resort, commanding, I'm sure for those top stories, several $1 million in value. And this is more of the same. It's well and good that we're looking at 35 non-market rental, but really it's a small contribution to exactly what the mayor pointed out, the increase in FSR, one of the highest towers on the North Shore, and the challenges of the area and the issues of construction traffic. So I don't think that this timing, we again have to feel the build out of all the development, and there's been a considerable and significant amount of development in this area, not to mention the development that's happening at Park Royal just over the bridge. How people are dealing with all of that traffic. So I think we really need to feel the build out like we do in other areas before we begin approving more development. These projects aren't a year in the making. These are multi-year construction projects, several years. In fact, the Grouse Inn was zoned and 4 years later it started, 5 years later it started. It was delayed, the property was sold and flipped. So yeah, I think I understand that the you know, the need for some counselors to look at what we can squeeze out of these, but you have to look at the whole picture. You have to look at the big picture on the North Shore and understand how all of this impacts everything. We're not the West End. We don't have multiple ways into that community. I think the mayor raises a very good point in regards to the podiums and the towers. The West End was livable because you could see down the streets. You could see through the towers. And we used to say that we would build towers. Lisa, we're going to build towers. We're going to go up to preserve the land base. The land base has not been preserved at all. It's been filled with podiums of 6 stories and 5 stories and townhouses and commercial. You know, I'm very concerned that that livability in regards to Lower Capilano and that vibrancy, as the mayor points out, is not going to be there. You know, it's not that bustling area that was looked at. So I think it's a mistake going in this direction, particularly because of the construction projects that continue and haven't even started in regards to Earls. They're asking for increased stories on that project, and it's going to be very, very challenging. So there you go.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Forbes, and again, we're just passing 10 o'clock. And so as soon as we're done with this, I will be asking for a motion to extend the meeting to 11 o'clock. Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I still stand by the reasons that I gave and Councillor Hanson gave, that I just piggybacked on because he said some of the things that I was going to say. But I also think that the points that you raised are also critical and very important. You talked about the 10% lift on that, and yet we're up paying for it too by giving them the extra density if we went through with this project the way it is. And we're only getting an 11% back on affordable housing. So, and the timing, I mean, as I said, I heard from residents down in that area, and they, between the start over with the townhouses, and oh, I just went blank, the townhouses on Belle Isle, it started there, construction, and between that happening and then spreading down and then spreading around, there may be newer tenants that are in there, and you may think that that's not going to bother them, but I'm sure that it probably will when it goes on for 18 months or 2 years. So I've already heard from some people down there, and I do believe that the timing is not right, as you said, Mayor. The timing needs to be different, but I do recognize what's been said about the park and the road. But the West Van project is just going to come out onto Capilano Road as well, and they're already ahead of the stage of what we are with this particular project. So for the previous reasons I stated, and some of the reasons that you stated, the mayor, and that I have heard from people down there, I'm afraid I'm still on the reject side of it.
Thank you, Councillor. Noted. And Councillor Curran.
Yeah, since Mr. Geller now has the weight of the Lionsgate Town Center livability on his shoulders, I was just reflecting on that my mother-in-law used to live at the Kiwanis building in Lynn Valley, and the upper floors of that social housing project are for all of the people. And it's the beautiful place where you can play games and do things. So if you really want to wow us, come back with the penthouses for the people. And yeah, we'll be waiting for that. But I do think there's a lot of merit. I'm not really joking, Mr. Geller. But I think that it's worth moving forward, and but with some serious considerations to the biggest form of housing that we need in our community, which is social housing right now. So let's see.
Thank you, Councillor. I see no further speakers. I'm going to call the motion, question on the motion. All those in favor? Contrary minded?
Opposed.
Motion carries with Councillors Curran, Back, Bond, and Mayor Little in favor. Does that reflect your record, Mr. Clerk?
Could you just restate that again? So who was opposed?
Councillors Curran, Back, Bond, and Little in favor, with Forbes, Hanson, and Murray opposed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Geller. Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Hartford. We need to move along. Council, I'm going to move that we extend the meeting to 11 o'clock. Will someone second that?
So moved. Second.
Seconded by Councillor Hanson. Call question. All those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none opposed, I'm going to declare that that is unanimous support for this. We have 55 minutes. I have 2 speakers on item 3.6, and we have item 3.5 still to go as well. So, Council, I'm just going to ask for your most important comments on each of these remaining items, if at all possible. So, moving along to item 3.5, this is the standards and regulations in single-family zones. I had originally intended to again go around the horn and get everybody's opinion. I don't know that we have time to do that separately, so instead I'm going to put a motion on the floor for discussion right away. And that motion is that we advance everything except for the amendments to item 732 to bylaw 7325. This is the Christmas lights piece. And so what I'm doing is advancing every other discussion point, the other 4 topic target areas, and then I'm proposing that we scuttle the changes that were proposed to 7325.
So then, Your Worship, just to confirm, that will be bylaw 8472, 8476 for first reading and referral to public hearing, 8474 for first, second, and third reading, and not 8473.
Well, now you got me there. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, page 6 of the agenda, as printed, except deleting out the 3rd paragraph referring to bylaw 8473, which is amendments to 7325.
That's correct. Is there a
Okay.
seconder for that motion? Seconded by Councillor Muri. So just my own comments on this. I remember that public hearing or public workshop very well. I remember the discussion. It's actually still, the video is still there, and I was reviewing it over the weekend. I think that the biggest issue for me is the retaining walls. I think we need to put something in place now. It may not be a perfect solution, but it's something that I think we need to put in place right away. I do note that on the Christmas lights issue that got so much media attention today, that this is something that originated at a public workshop. A member of the public raised a concern. We were already discussing nuisance bylaw, abatement bylaw at the time, talking about sound, light, retaining walls, hardscape, whether it's or permeable surfaces. And then the issue was raised of Christmas lights. We went away, and a full year later, that was on November 19th of last year, this was presented with this Christmas lights amendment. So this is the very first time that this council has had an opportunity to discuss that item. I don't know that that was necessarily represented in the media discussion that happened today. It seemed like it was a council initiative, or that we were that we had discussions on the matter previously. This is the first time we've had any discussion on 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. or a restriction of that nature. And my view is that the community is not ready for it. And even though I do see that we need to have a discussion on that matter in the long run, I'm not doing it as part of an omnibus review of this matter. And so I'll be supporting everything else, but that in the motion. Councillor Muri, you're the second speaker.
Thank you, Mayor Little. Yeah, and I think this work, it's certainly, I think there's a lot of issues that maybe are not part of the report that I'm going to ask about. But generally, over the last, 6 years, the previous term, when all the construction was going on, it wasn't just construction and redevelopment in town centers that was happening. It was an enormous amount of single family redevelopment. I think it had gone up something like 700% in the district, single family redevelopment. And it's, a lot of it was happening in the Upper Capilano Highlands. One of the biggest issues was the removal of the canopy in the Upper Capilano area, the amount of green foliage that was being removed in order to build subterranean basements and very, very large homes, you know, that came with, you know, lots of bells and whistles, like commercial sized generators and, you know, specialty kitchens, lots of hard surface, lots of lights, lots of soffits, you know, homes with you know, 87 pot lights under their soffits to light up the landscaping. You know, the vast majority of homes were being built by contractors, and the neighborhoods were undergoing this huge transformation. And it was very, very challenging. And we had a lot of concerns, a lot of complaints. You know, there would be neighborhoods in Upper Capilano, Delbrook, the Highlands, where there was like 3 or 4 houses being built on a street at one time. Like it was crazy. It was insane. And people were trying to live at the same time. And so all of these issues in regards to single family were being brought forward at that time. And I think that the questions that I would have, and I completely agree about the issues of light. This is, you know, I mean, certainly it was not intended, light pollution was not intended to dampen Christmas and the holidays, Halloween, Diwali, any of those other things. I think, you know, the issues surrounding impacts to residential homes or existing residential homes in neighborhoods really have to do with enforcement, good neighborhood policies, and decisions made in consideration of neighboring properties. And Mayor Little, you've made comment of the retaining walls. And we have several very significant examples of retaining walls, especially those that exist on slopes. And the impacts to the neighboring property owners have been so severe that they have, you know, the work and the money that they put into their homes. The Wedge House is one of them. At one time, the Wedge House it's a heritage house that has been restored with great care. And because of a bylaw, the Wedge House now has a wall down their north side yard that is a garage to the upslope neighboring property, because of an interpretation, in my opinion, and a change that is needed to take the least amount of impact to neighboring properties. So the value of their properties can be also protected, and the livability and enjoyment of their properties can be protected. Another example was a property on Skyline where a pool that had once sat in the backyard was going to now move to the front yard. Again on a new build, and a wall, a retaining wall, which is being addressed in this bylaw, basically blocked the entire view and sky from the neighboring property, who sits well back on the lot. And the stress that the family incurred was significant. Very upsetting. They had just recently bought the home, and their dream home, living the dream on the North Shore. And the bylaw that was written was well within the contractor's right to be able to build this way, but the impact was significant. We have dealt with monster homes over the years, and I hear Ernie Christ in my head saying, oh my God, monster homes. And monster homes to Ernie Christ back in the day was 4,500 square feet, 5,000 square feet. Maybe in Upper Braemar, maybe we could get into those larger square footages. You know, some of them right now, they're massive. They are well in excess of that. And there is an impact to them. And we do have to take care that we try to find a balance within our neighborhoods, so everybody that's living there can enjoy, and no one is as negatively impacted as some have been. So I think this is a good start. But I would like to ask Mr. Milburn, the issue of the siting of the garages in the front, because council did 2 councils ago, and I think Mayor Little, you were a councillor then, we did look at the side entry garages or these front garages. How are we going to be addressing that? Because certainly the example of the Wedge House, and all of council toured that property. How are we going to be dealing with that? And does this bylaw address the ability for us to site, as an example, on the north side on the uphill side of the property in order to reduce the impact to the downhill residents?
Quick response, Mr. Milburn.
Yeah, so this particular recommendation does have a direct impact on the height of accessory structures. So going from a height measured from essentially the slab of the garage, wherever that is, to more of a measurement above the natural grade. So it will definitely have an impact on sloping properties. And so what we potentially see is more variances where a proponent would propose a certain solution and then bring that forward to council or board of variance for consideration. So that would naturally push the kind of development toward the upslope side of the property, given that many variances might not be acceptable if the impacts are too significant to the adjacent property on the downslope side.
So in every case, will the height be able to deal with the impact on the downslope?
The height will be the same, essentially, measurement that we use typically for the principal structure. So we're looking at the natural grade versus whatever the slab height they choose, which is the way it's currently defined, which creates this opportunity. So you have this really significant wall feature, and the change we're recommending would prevent that from happening.
Okay. Okay, those are my comments for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. I have Councillor Curran, followed by Councillors Bond and Hanson.
Thanks. Yeah, I think the same thing. We were all like, what, how did we get here? And I watched back, and I think you had mentioned that it didn't make sense to have lights on necessarily in the middle of the night. I think you said 4 a.m. or something. And so, yeah, I'm not supporting that, but I guess we've removed that off the, can you explain to me, Mayor Little, you moved that item off of?
I struck it from the motion, so.
That's parked now?
That's correct.
Okay, good. Just to clarify, the goal was not to, we obviously want to keep everyone lights on and be inclusive. And I think there was some good feedback that came in that will allow us to do that better. I guess I'm just concerned generally about process, because there were certain things that were brought up at that meeting that didn't make it in, and some that did make it in that I thought were maybe not as important. And so I am concerned because there's people advocating for actually raising the buildings to allow people to live outside. And I just wanted to understand from staff's perspective, if this building elevation bylaw specifically is going, if the discussion around raising building height more generally, because we have flood issues, and so we want to, and livability for people to live not in basements, is that a completely separate issue than this bylaw? I just want to make sure I understand the implications of this particular, the one in regards to buildings.
Mr. Milburn?
That's a separate issue. I think we'd be looking at, this particular one deals with accessory structures. So this is garage type space, and the kinds of issues and concerns that have been raised and mentioned earlier by Councillor Murray. If you're looking at issues around height related to living space and so on, that will be part of a future conversation with council, but not proposed in tonight's amendments.
Okay, so can staff just clarify, it might be because it's late, but I just want to understand the motion that's on the floor right now. Could someone please clarify?
Your worship, could I clarify?
Please.
If you, Councillor Curran, if you're looking at page 6 of the agenda, it lists a number of parts to that proposed staff resolution.
Okay.
And what I wanted to say, Your Worship, is of the several parts, we had deleted the reference to bylaw 8473. I've since been told that if we're dropping that one, we don't need bylaw 8474 either, which was the associated fines with the lighting. So I think you'll probably agree we can omit those two bylaws. So then for Councillor Kern's benefit, the resolution reads that bylaw, I'll paraphrase, bylaw 8472, which is a zoning bylaw amendment, is given first reading, as is bylaw 8476, a zoning bylaw amendment, given first reading. Both of those are referred to public hearings.
Okay.
And that's it.
Okay, and for public, if anyone's still awake, that's the accessory building and the retaining wall. Correct? Those are the two? Yes?
Oh, perhaps Mr. Bill Milburn or Mr. Dwyer could comment on the content of those bylaws.
What might be helpful if Mr. Dwyer could just jump in. I believe he's with us tonight and here to answer questions and explain the bylaw. So Mr. Dwyer just focused on the items that are remaining in council's resolution, so not the Christmas lights.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. Through your worship, rezoning bylaw 8472 is the amendment to reduce the overall impact of retaining walls. So the current regulation allows a 4-foot retaining wall with any subsequent retaining walls being located within a 45-degree height plane with no height limit, whereas that zoning bylaw amendment would propose a 3-foot first retaining wall with any subsequent retaining wall being located within a 35-degree height plane, so a lower height plane, lowering the height of subsequent retaining walls, plus the addition of a maximum height of 8 feet, whereas there was no maximum height in the existing. So that's that bylaw, and we would be giving that first reading, referring to public hearing. The second bylaw, as Mr. Milburn pointed out, relates to accessory buildings and structures. The existing regulation, it does not have the height limit. The height is measured from a slab or floor elevation, whereas the proposed amendment, and sorry, that current situation can result in fairly significantly high foundation wall structures. And I think I think Councillor Miri mentioned next to the wedge house. That was what we saw next to the wedge house. The amendment to the bylaw is how we measure height for detached accessory structures, including parking garages, and that would only allow a maximum of 4-foot height for the slab elevation from natural grade. So in that example that was mentioned, the height of that structure would come down about more than a story, would come down 1.5 stories. They're the two amendments that are being proposed and referred to. They're zoning bylaw amendments, which require a public hearing.
Thank you. I think that's helpful for hopefully everyone to understand. Thanks for that clarification. Wow, I've lost it. Someone else want to chime in?
I've got a full slate here. Councillors Bond, Hanson, and back. Councillor Bond.
Thanks, Mayor Little. Well, I'm very glad that the Christmas lights time thing is off of this recommendation. I thought it was a little bit ridiculous at the time. I think I mentioned that in the November 19th workshop that I didn't think we should be regulating this. So I'm glad that it's off the table now. I think one thing it kind of speaks to, and I know we've been working on this, is the process in our workshops. We have these open-ended workshops where lots of suggestions kind of get tossed about by council, and at the end of those workshops sometimes it's difficult to understand, and I think it's difficult for staff to understand exactly what the direction is. And I remember from that meeting where where we had that discussion. I'm just laughing at Mayor Little, the background on your Zoom right now. But I remember at that meeting where we were discussing the nuisance lighting and the various types of lighting, I think it is hard for staff to follow up with what specifically is going to be recommended. So I'd like to see some more structure and in our workshops and when things are suggested that we actually maybe do, whether it's straw polls or votes, to see exactly which recommendations are going to be brought forward and staff to be working on. I have a similar concern to the two bylaw amendments that are proposed with the accessory building structures and the retaining wall height. And it kind of goes back to the same thing as the Christmas lights, is that our response to this was based on one or two instances. And, I think Councillor Murray mentioned that these two incidences were quite egregious, but we're now proposing a bylaw that's going to affect possibly up to 20,000 different properties in the district. And I don't think we really have done a full analysis on what the impact of these bylaw changes will do. I asked for that during the workshop, if we could look at different scenarios about whether it's even existing homes that have these types of walls and what the impacts are. But I think if we're going to be making a bylaw changes that are going to affect that many properties, then we need to do a much more thorough analysis on what these changes will mean, whether it's changes for people wishing to build a new home or repair their existing retaining walls or make other impacts. I think this needs a lot more work and consultation. I don't know if that's going to happen when it gets to the public hearing, and I don't know that kind of having a workshop format where we kind of suggest different numbers for retaining wall heights and different angles is really the best format. I don't know. So I'd like to see a little bit more analysis on staff's point on what kind of changes this will mean for people that are wishing to build their homes in the district. So, reluctantly, I'm okay with it going to public hearing, but I have a lot of concerns about kind of the process to get here and what kind of an analysis we're doing and on the impacts of people that have those properties across the district.
This is not just to upstage Councillor Bond and his background. I just wanted to make sure that people know that I do have love a good Christmas display, and I turn the lights off at night. I've got still hands up, Councillor Curran. I think was that for a second time on this one? Sorry, it doesn't always come up in order. I believe the next first-time speaker is Councillor Hanson on this matter.
Yes, thank you very much, Your Worship. Just dealing with the issue of Christmas lights, I mean, it's clear based on the public feedback we've received today that at least at this time, there is no public support for the idea of regulating people's usage of Christmas lights. So I'm glad that that's off the agenda, and clearly that's a matter that we have to move past. As to the other initiatives, they arose out of workshop discussions. They represent initiatives that have as their goal the minimizing of negative impacts of single-family construction and redevelopment. I believe these initiatives make sense, and I also believe that they will receive public support. In any event, today's motion is merely to move it to public hearing so that we can hear the public's views. And if there is further analysis, more nuance to be uncovered with respect to these initiatives, then that will arise out of the public hearing process. So I'm happy to move or support the retaining wall motion and the garage height motion going to public hearing and hearing the views of the community on those issues.
Thank you, Councillor Hanson. Councillor Back.
Well, thank you, Your Worship. I'm just glad that we can all have our Christmas lights on. I know this meeting's probably going to go to 11 o'clock. I won't have to rush out there and turn my lights out because I put the lights up early this year, like a lot of people in our community, and I certainly didn't want to be the Grinch that ruined Christmas this year, particularly this year. Now, on a more serious note, with regard to the other items being sent to public hearing, I guess I share similar concerns to Councillor Bond in that I don't feel that I know enough about the implications of passing these particular regulations, but realize it's to send it to public hearing, and so I will be supporting it. But I would like to hear from more of the community, particularly those that are in the business of building homes, and what the impact this sort of change makes for them, and how single family homes are built. So I will be supporting it, but with some reluctance, because I do want to definitely hear more about both changes.
Thank you, Councillor Back. I've got Councillors Murray and Forbes. Councillor Murray.
Well, I was just going to say that this is not trying to prevent people from building homes. It's just, as Councillor Hampson pointed out, it's just going to lessen the negative impacts that come along with building on slopes. We live on a mountain. We've got lots of challenges with building in the District of North Vancouver. We've got multiple water courses. We've got people build on cliffs in the Cove and Strathcona. You know, the Highlands and Delbrook and Capilano, the whole, you know, basically the entire part of that community is on a slope, Lynn Valley. So these are just going to, you know, again, I go back to, for every action, there's a reaction. And, you know, we want to minimize. I don't know why we would ever feel good about allowing a garage to completely obstruct, you know, the light and the front yard enjoyment of any property owner. Why would that ever be something that we would want to allow? And I think it's because of the redevelopment that has been taking place in our current zoning bylaws that we've realized that these kinds of scenarios can be realized. And certainly as we move forward, we want to be able to lessen that. I do have a question in regards to the concept of front yard pools and the impact of that, and just where that falls into the generally pools are in a rear yard, not usually in a front yard, and certainly you know, there's some instances where they're appropriate and they don't have a negative impact, but how are they regulated, Mr. Dwyer or Mr. Milburn, whoever's listening?
Mr. Milburn.
Just give Mr. Dwyer a moment. I think he might be looking quick.
Oh, is he looking? I wasn't sure. Are you looking, Mr. Dwyer? I'm sorry.
I believe there isn't a limitation currently on the location.
There is or isn't?
Is not.
Okay.
In the current zoning bylaw, which is why we saw that example that was permitted by zoning.
Right.
There are, of course, other, you know, public health and safety matters related to pools and fencing and so on that go along with that, wherever they're located on the property. Maybe Mr. Dwyer, if you had any additional comments.
Dwyer?
Just to say that they can be located in a rear or a front setback. Generally speaking, they're typically in a rear setback because people generally like the privacy of that. But there are examples of.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, following Councillor Murray, we have Councillor Forbes.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm falling asleep. I think I've forgotten what I was going to say. I was just going to say, similar to, I think, what Councillor Murray was saying, that we have now seen some of the fallout from some of the things that can happen. And those builders were building within our current bylaws. So they were able to do what they did in most cases. And we've seen the fallout and the impact it has. So just because there's only half a dozen people maybe that have complained, there's certainly, you know, tens of homes, if not 100 homes that are built on slopes in the district that have these very large retaining walls and have these side garages that could possibly affect neighbors that maybe are just living with it. So I'm in favor of this going to a public hearing and hearing from the community about how they feel about it.
Thank you, Councillor Forbes. Any other comments, Council? Okay, hearing none, I'm going to call the question on the motion. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say nay. I hear none opposed. So, Mr. Clerk, I'm going to declare unanimous support for the motion.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Okay, council, now we have one of those tricky situations. We have 27 minutes left before we run up against the legislated end of the meeting. And so I have two speakers that are still on the line, although Marion, who was going to be speaking to the item, has had to leave, but she's passed her speaking notes on to Lori Parkinson, who is still a part of the meeting. We can continue on if you would like. I don't want to rush. I mean, I know that we've dealt with this matter several times, but I think that you know, I'm just sort of looking around. Is everybody okay with me proceeding with item 3.6 at this time? Okay, I got a majority saying yes, but if we run up across 11 o'clock, I suspect we will not be able to get an extension of the meeting, which requires unanimous consent. And so at this point, apologize to the speakers that had signed up to speak. We're so late in the evening, but I appreciate you staying with us. At this point, I'm going to go to Lori Parkinson for your comments. You have 3 minutes to address the council.
Thank you, Mayor and councilors. This is Marion speaking. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you this evening. Over a year ago, I was here as well, speaking to you as one of many District of North Vancouver residents, encouraging you to take real climate action in follow-up to the climate emergency you had declared over the summer of 2019. At the time, I was pregnant with my second child, and he was born only a few weeks after the council meeting. When I was on maternity leave with him, I decided to become more active in climate action because I often wake up in the night worrying about my children's future. I don't want to look my children in their eyes when they grow up and tell them I continued life as normal in the face of the climate crisis and thus denying them a healthy and safe future. Little did I know that the normal we knew last year is no longer the normal we have now. COVID came and we quickly ramped up a response plan to manage COVID, way faster than we ever thought was possible and way faster than we have ever done in response to another even more dangerous crisis, the climate emergency. Imagine if we could do the same with our efforts to combat climate change. I am pleased to see that you're discussing the motion today that is a step towards eliminating greenhouse gas emissions in new buildings. However, I'm disappointed that it's considerably watered down from the original motion presented by Councillor Curran in the summer, and that it will take a year to take effect after its initial proposal by Megan. Unfortunately, it appears the motion has some flaws in it, such as the option of going to a higher step and then installing gas heating, and not prescribing the more energy and cost-effective option, the heat pump, like the District of West Vancouver did. I have serious questions if this motion is solid enough to help us toward the 41% reduction of building emissions we need to make it our target. Although I commend you for being a leader in this space, I do want to get my concern across that the climate crisis is still not being treated with the urgency and boldness required to give our kids a real hope for the future. Last July, I started For Our Kids North Vancouver, and we are a group of parents and grandparents fighting against climate change. While you may have mostly interacted with Force of Nature on climate action related motions, please know that there is a growing number of environmental groups and concerned residents on the North Shore who are looking to have their voices heard. Expect to see more of us over the next few months as we are following the developments with great interest. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for sharing Marion's comments tonight. We appreciate it. Mr. Teven, are you able to hear me?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me back?
Yes, I can. You have 3 minutes to address council.
Thank you, Your Worship. You know, I want to start out my comments in speaking contrary to this proposal by saying, and you, council, are all well aware, I've communicated with you in advance on previous sessions on this, that I'm maybe the one person that has taken the proposal and the limit that is contained in this proposal and boiled it down to what it would actually mean in the real world. And I can tell you categorically, I had those numbers vetted by experts, and this is tantamount to a ban. To try to get a single family house down to 3 kilograms of CO2 per square meter per year is tantamount to a ban. So let's be very clear about that. I think the other thing that needs to be acknowledged is that this ban does not affect all buildings. It only singles out low density to mid density wood frame residential and single family homes. High density will still be exempt. Public buildings will be exempt. Commercial buildings will still be exempt. So we're not taking the leap ahead that many think that we are. The other thing that needs to be acknowledged is the use of heat pumps. As you'll recall, I'm a case in point. I have a heat pump. And I can tell you this, that heat pumps still run on electricity. Hydro still charges punitive rates for anybody who's above the average. And my hydro bill is 2.5 times my natural gas utility bill. I want to call upon this council, if you intend to support this, that this measure has such far-reaching implications to future people looking to acquire homes in the district that I really call upon you to call a public hearing on the subject. There are major stakeholders left out, including no less than 30,000 Fortis BC customers in the District of North Vancouver. What this will do is drive up design costs, it'll drive up construction costs, and more importantly, drive up operation costs of homes in the district. The one thing I'm encouraged by is the comments earlier in this council meeting, where one of you said, we have to model the behavior that we want. And I've written to you about this, and I'll say this now. Which of you on council is modeling that behavior? And when you come to a vote on this subject, I challenge you, if you're about to vote yes to support this ban, tell us, please, how do you heat your own home today? How big is your own home today? How many cars do you have in your family? Are you modeling the behavior that you are going to require all future builders to do? I'm almost out of time, but you know, I've talked about air travel. You've done nothing about it. It is the single biggest risk to greenhouse gases in Vancouver, in my opinion. I have to close there, but thank you for listening.
Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Teven, and once again, my apologies for leaving your comments to so late in the evening. I do appreciate you sticking around. Okay, Council, looking for someone to put a motion on the floor for this item. I have Councillor Forbes first in the queue, followed by Councillor Hanson. Councillor Forbes, do you have a motion? I need you. You are muted.
Sorry. I'd like to put a motion on the floor. Just the recommendation that's here says that for it to be given first, second, and third readings, and I would like to amend that to be that it go to for first reading. That way, after first reading, if we vote on it and that passes, that way after first reading, it can go to a public hearing and we can hear the community, more people's input. Since this first came up, I've been asking for, at first, I asked for education because there's a lot of acronyms in this to do around this. And even when you go and look up the acronyms, you get more acronyms. So it takes a bit of time to research and read and start to understand what they're talking about. So I really think that this is important enough to change the future, that I really believe that we need to have a public hearing on it and hear from the community as well before we go farther into the second and third.
Can I just get some direction on that? Because then you'd be giving it first reading tonight and referring the matter to a public hearing of some kind, which we wouldn't necessarily normally do in a situation like this. So can I just check with the clerk? Is that how you would like this handled, if that's the intent?
Your Worship, I would not like to give advice on the public hearing matter at this moment without further consultation with our solicitor, Mr. Milburn, and the CAO. However,
fair at this point, sorry to cut you off, Mr. Clerk, is it fair at this point to have Councillor Forbes move first reading and refer the matter back to staff to consider how we can do public consultation?
No, Your Worship, I would just go, given that it's legislative process, legislative steps, I would just give it first reading, leave it at that. We understand what the intention is. Staff will have to confer tomorrow exactly how to proceed. And if there is some sort of hearing, we'll try to arrange that. If not, it can always step back in at second reading.
Is that satisfactory, Councillor Forbes?
Yes, I understand. If I understand correctly, we're going to look into seeing if we do pass it for first, that we can get some kind of public consultation, like a public hearing. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. I'm okay with that then.
I think I've got Councillor Murray is the next speaker on the matter. Councillor Murray.
Oh, yeah, Your Worship, we need a seconder first.
Will you second the motion?
No.
No. Okay. Is there a seconder for Councillor Forbes's motion? At this point in the evening, this is I think it's a pragmatic way forward. So I'm going to say second. I'll second the motion, and we may run up against the clock here. Councillor Forbes, any further comment?
No, I just want to emphasize that I think this is we're changing direction here. And so this is a big step. And even myself, I'm not totally clear, and it's not that I haven't put in the work, but I have a lot of questions to ask about it as well. And I'm sure that our community does. And so if we're going to pivot into another direction, I want to do it with everybody, or as many people as possible, understanding what we're doing and not coming back, a year later and thinking that something kind of got passed without them having input on it. So I just want the community to have input on it and everybody to have a little bit of an education on this, and hopefully then that'll be fine.
I'm going to go to Mr. Stewart for a comment.
Your Worship, if there's some confusion as to what we can do and what we should be referring to public hearing, I would suggest we defer this matter. Not that it's not important, but if we're not clear on what the consequences are and what the repercussions are and what the support in the community are, I think there's general support for the direction that we're going. But if the consequences and the repercussions aren't understood, we're better off to defer this matter and look at some kind of public consultation process to make sure that everybody understands what exactly is being proposed. That's my comment. Thank you.
That's fair. I'm going to Councillor Murray next as the next speaker, or are you proposing deferral or something else?
Sorry. Oh, well, I think if we look on page 242 of the report, consultation and industry engagement, staff have engaged with industry stakeholders on the proposed low carbon energy two-tier approach to the energy step code. Outreach included several organizations, including the Home Builders Association of Vancouver, contractors, professionals, and with active building permits in the district. I know Mr. Tevan refers to this as a ban, and I'd just like to give Mr. Dwyer an opportunity to comment on those comments, because this is about new building. There are options. It is trying to find a balance. And I would also suggest that the two other municipalities, and Mr. Dwyer, if you could comment on that, what the District of West Van and the City of North Vancouver is doing, because generally in these situations, we try to, have a level playing field on the North Shore. So I just would like him to comment on those 2 points, Mr. Dwyer.
Mr. Dwyer.
Thank you, through you, Your Worship. In terms of the adjacent municipalities, our municipal partners on the North Shore, the City of North Vancouver has very recently, I think last week, given first, second, and third reading to bylaws that are very similar to what's being proposed here today. It's it's not a prescriptive approach, whereas West Vancouver is more of a prescriptive approach. If you look at their bylaw, if you're going to go with the low carbon option, really you're doing a heat pump. What we're saying is we're setting a greenhouse gas intensity target, which was the direction that council provided, and giving industry the opportunity to satisfy that. So they may, will the market bear electric baseboard heat for a $4 million home in Edgemont? I don't think so. There's certainly the opportunity to do heat pumps. It's not prohibited. You could do an air-to-air heat pump, which would preheat for an electric furnace. You could do an air-to-water heat pump to preheat for hydronic heating. So it just gives the opportunity to do a range of solutions without being prescriptive. It's a performance-based, and I think that's the appropriate approach.
Yeah, I think this is trying to find a balance. It's not a perfect environmental solution, which is what Ms. Parkinson commented on, and the speaker that she was representing. It's certainly not perfect, but we've had this conversation in regards to if it was all hydroelectric energy. Again, there's reactions to every action, and there's certainly impacts to that. As far as walking the talk, my house has electric heat and natural gas, and so I guess I can say that I'm trying, and my house was built, in the mid-1980s. So this is, we're evolving. There's lots of things that are changing. We're trying to be more responsible. We're trying to give options to builders and contractors and homeowners. This is not about a ban. In my very layman's way of understanding how this works, if you want natural gas, you need to create a more forceful containment of that. And if you then there's opportunities or perks if you're going to look at sort of an electric route. There's always this comment about the costs, and I guess we should reflect back on the costs of consumerism and costs of development and costs of population on our planet. Certainly the best position, or the best solution I found, and again, let's not let the loss of life go in vain, but was this pandemic. Boy, it taught us what we could change, how we could live differently, how we could do things differently, and how it would impact us. So there were lessons that came out of this very dark period in our society. But I think that, again, this is about new construction, and the building community is evolving on their own. They're going to begin to do these things because consumers are going to be wanting a more sustainable building. They're going to be wanting that environmental impact to be lessened on the homes that they build, and they're going to be demanding this. So I think this is a fair way to proceed, and certainly it will improve over the years. It will change, it will evolve, and hopefully the planet and ourselves will be better off.
Thank you, Councillor Murray. My next speaker is Mr. Stewart. Did you have a comment?
I was muted. I made my comment earlier. Thank you.
And Councillor Murray has made her comment. Councillor Curran, did you have a comment?
Can we call a vote on that motion so we can get the other motion on the floor? Because I'd really like to see this go through this evening, because there's been a lot of work put into this by staff, and we are in a climate emergency. So I'd like to not defer this.
Okay. There's still a speakers list of, although I think that might have exhausted it. Are there any other speakers on this item? And then I'll call the question on this item.
I'm up, Your Honor.
Okay.
Your Honor. I'm trying to stay awake.
Councillor Forbes. Yep,
I just want to say, I just want to say, like from the beginning, everybody's talking about the industry has come in this and that a lot of people already want this. That's fine. All I'm trying to say is it's our job to also communicate with the community. And I don't think we've done a full enough job to communicate to the community that we're going to do a pivot here and what that might entail. And so all I'm asking for is that we allow a hearing, and that's not delaying it for a year or two and it's going to interfere with a timeline on the emergency. I'm asking for maybe a week here or 2 weeks to get community educated about it and get them informed and get them to tell us their view. That's all I'm asking for.
Thank you, Councillor. I have Councillor Bond. You're next.
If you will entertain it and it's the appropriate time, Mayor Little, I will make a motion to call the question on this matter.
Just want to check in, Councillor Hanson, you're a first-time speaker after Councillor Bond. Are you okay with us calling the question?
Yes, I am. I just wanted to agree with Councillor Kern on this. And this is, in my view, it's already gone through a workshop. It represents a compromise. It has avoided a series of extremes. In my view, we did declare a climate emergency. In my view, it's important that we move this matter forward without hesitation. And I'd like to call the question on this motion. And then in the 5 minutes remaining, I'd like to call the question on the staff recommendation.
Okay, and again, Councillor Back, you're a first-time speaker. Are you okay with me just going straight to calling the question, or you want to comment?
Oh, we're up against the clock, so yeah, we can call the question. We've had lots of time to look at this, and I'll comment after.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Councillor Bond, for putting that forward. I will call the question on the motion.
Your
All
worship.
those in favor.
Your
Sorry.
worship.
Yes, Mr. Clark.
I think Councillor Bond can probably withdraw his motion to call the previous question. That's a vote to take the vote because everybody said their piece, so they're okay with the main question.
Withdrawn.
So thank you very much. So we're just straight on to the main vote as speakers are exhausted now.
Call the question on the motion. All those in favor of Councillor Forbes' motion, say aye. All those opposed, say nay. The matter is defeated. And I'll look to the list. I have a hand up for Councillor Bond at the top of the list.
Your worship, could we just get a rundown of those opposed? I heard it was Councillor
Forbes and myself were the only ones in favor. Everybody else was opposed.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Councillor Bond, you're the first person up on the speakers list. You have an alternative motion.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay. Staff recommendation has been moved by Councillor Bond, seconded by Councillor Curran. Any further discussion on the motion? You're the mover, Councillor Bond.
I'll defer to Councillor Curran as the seconder.
Councillor Curran.
Thank you. This is about taking action. I'm happy to educate the community. They're important issues. We can do both. Let's pass this motion. Let's take this step, and we'll talk about it endlessly after we're not up against the wall. I appreciate council's support on this. Let's call the question.
Thank you. Any other members of council wishing to address the motion? Okay, then I will call the question on the motion. All of those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Councillor Forbes opposed. Thank you very much, council. Mr. Clerk, I have I have 6 in favor, 1 opposed, with Councillor Forbes opposed. Does that match your record?
Yes, it does. Thank you, your worship.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, council.
Having completed the items up for business this evening, I'm going to skip reports, although I don't think we actually wrote reports into the agenda because it was a special meting.
Move adjournment.
So then I will accept adjournment. Thank you, Councillor Murray. Thank you, council, for all of your help this evening. It was a very complicated evening, despite having only 6 items on the agenda. They were all very meaty, and I appreciate you taking the time and sticking it out to the end.
Thanks, Lori.
Yeah, good night.